Hello, everybody. A little bit of a late start there. We like to fiddle with our sound settings. If
Yep.
you're watching the VOD, I don't know. People do let us know in chat if we do sound a bit weird at all. It seems that OBS changes its settings every time, so we have that kind of pre-on-air thing. Also, I hope that I have now sorted the advert problems people are having. I think we are no longer giving people ads when the stream starts and making them miss bits of it. So yeah, I think I've finally got YouTube to behave itself. Although it keeps trying to force me to make comments be like all manually approved, which is really annoying. I don't like that. That's shite. So yeah, we're yeah. Apparently, I have an echo.
You have an
Yeah,
echo?
I'm really room tony for some reason on the other end. I don't know why that is. I've not changed my mic settings at all. I just sound crap for some reason. Yeah, I'm weirdly room tony, but I can't really solve that, I'm afraid.
Huh.
It just seems that Discord changes my mic quality on the fly. As long as you can actually hear me and I'm not too horrendous in terms of tone. I have considered like recording these at some point and having like direct feed audio from both of us, but that's just like I don't know, that's not really feasible.
No.
But yeah,
You
this is
sound
a bit
you
of a
sound fine.
do-over.
You sound fine, dude. It's okay. It's okay. Your hair looks lovely, dear.
All right. I'm definitely using the right mic. I've just checked that actually. I've literally just checked that. I think it might be Discord's audio settings since we do this through Discord.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to worry about it too much. I am definitely using the right mic. Yes. The greater good of the stream, yeah. We just have to
Indeed.
kind of do this really, since after what happened a couple of weeks ago. Because I will link it in the pinned comment, and I'm sure you guys were there. Some of you were there for it for last time, but we did have a major YouTube outage during our last stream, and there was actually a major service outage of the day, like some sort of Cloudflare like service just went completely like off. So we're quite lucky that's not going on right now. Yeah, people are saying there is a slight difference to normal. We'll try and fix that for next time, guys. But literally nothing has changed apart from our levels. So I don't know. Maybe my game's the same. My mic setting is the same. I'm just
what?
It's just inconsistent. I'm afraid.
It might. I mean, do you have your setting on cardioid? Because your voice just went through a massive range as you moved around. Then I could hear you moving as you were looking around.
Yes, I do have it on cardioid. Yes.
Yeah, because there is a lot of difference as you move. It might be a matter of just holding yourself next to the mic.
Is this better? Do I sound better now?
Yeah, actually, yeah, unironically, yeah.
Microphone properly then. I might be just where my mic was positioned. It's probably that. But anyway, enough fiddling around with the audio levels. We are back with Democratisation. Buckle in, folks. It's going to be a long stream as usual. Last week we had on Mr. Aquinas, Quinones. No one seems to quite know how to say his name, not least me, so we did apologise on air for that. It was very good having a conversation with him.
It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed that particular conversation. It was a lot of fun. He's a good guy.
Yes. And Evelyn was on his channel actually, which I will also link in the pinned comment. I think that's coming out Friday, so I'll try and if you're watching the VOD over the next couple of days, it won't be there, but I'll try and link that as soon as it goes live. But she was on, I think Freeman on the Wall is his thing.
Yeah.
On I keep saying Aquinas because it's easier, but Mr. Aquinas' YouTube channel. But yeah, this is the Totalitarian special do-over.
Yep, the rematch. This time they will not stop us. They will not shut us down. And as you know, I've been testing my streaming capabilities lately for the last couple of days by playing really old boomer games, and getting harassed by people in my server. But
yeah, I'll do some of the normal things first. Best way to donate to us if you want to donate is through Streamlabs. That is the pinned message in the chat currently. You can join the channel or you can do super chats, but YouTube does take quite a big cut of those. Although joining the YouTube channel is the best way currently for recurring support. I know quite a few guys have joined previously. I'll do a quick list off of the members at the end, since I didn't manage to last time. We didn't really have time. But you will get listed on this stream. And yeah, that's just kind of the normal stuff. We've noticed a lot more heavy filtering by YouTube itself. A lot of people, I did a poll, and 50% of people saying they are not, seeing our videos when we go live. So that's a bit discouraging, but it's to be expected. A lot of people hit that kind of uh, 2,500 subscribers. You get that big bump when you get monetized, and then YouTube just like destroys the hell out of you if you talk about the wrong topics, which we do obviously. So we've just got to kind of power through it, really, because there's no brakes on this train. We do sometimes do overs, but we should probably get into it because it's been a few minutes now, and I've just been waffling. So
get on with it. Yes.
Get on with it.
Right. Yes, because we are talking about it's essentially we're still in the 1920s to 1930s. The general build up towards what is going to happen after the 30s happen, which is the essentially the beginning of the Second World War, and the wind up to it. At this point, we've got Lenin in power in the 1920s, soon to keel over, die for whatever reason. Stalin takes over in 23. At the same time as that's happening, a certain chap with an odd moustache in Germany is holding a bit of a party in a beer hall in Munich that gets a bit out of hand, and he ends up in ends up in jail because of it. He writes a book about how he's been struggling a bit. And meanwhile, over in America, we've got a few people who are just generally throwing money around and making things a bit awkward for people.
Generally, they are doing that.
There we go. 3 hours, job done.
No,
people with odd moustaches.
This was a few weeks ago now. This was 3 weeks ago now, actually.
Yeah.
But the last episode we did was the period of 1920 to kind of 1929.
Yeah.
We got to the Great Depression and to the Wall Street crash, but we didn't really talk about it much in detail. And the reason I wanted to make this episode as a special episode, after the Keynesianism episode that we did, the previous special, is that we need to talk about the concepts of totalitarianism. This won't go into it will go into the historical specifics, but this is not, as you see, time period based like a lot of the other videos are.
No.
We are talking about really a lot of the theory of what does and doesn't make a total state. It's to do with the similarities and differences there, and it's going to be a bit more theory based. As like I said, there's going to be there's a lot of actual reading here. There's a lot of quotes we've got up, so do bear with us with those. Both of us are a little bit dyslexic, but we have, I think at last count, like nearly 20 of them, because we have at least 2 little sections for each of our little topic areas, each of our little slides here. Yeah. So there will be quite a lot of quoting, but it's one of the things that the materials that we use have absolutely nailed.
Yeah.
There's actually quite a lot of stuff I couldn't use. There's some stuff that I've got highlighted in Leviathan, its enemies especially. There's much more useful once we get to the end of the period. But it does discuss this stuff. But it is a bit more skipping around in time because it discusses some of the 1940s and 50s stuff as well. But specifically for the theory of what does and doesn't make a total state, a lot of the Hopper, a lot of the Mises, and a lot of the von Leden stuff, the guy's name we can't pronounce, is extremely useful. So that's what we'll be relying on quite heavily here.
Yes.
As always, we are not associated with the Mises Institute, but a lot of our resources do come from them because, unlike the communists, they're very good at making the literature available online for free in multiple formats. So good on them for that.
Yeah. Yeah, and ironically, I'm gonna try and at the Mises Institute with our shilling in the future. See if they'll reciprocate the shill. But I've got a lot of time for their site and a lot of time for the work. It's not all Mises, Hopper. We've got a couple of other people in here. Anthony Sutton is well worth a mention.
Of course, yes.
His work is a strong backbone to what we've been talking about in the future, and will be going on as well. And I found a nice little video of him, which I don't know if we want to play that video at some point during this, but
we can show it to people. We can link people to it. It'll be a good resource for people to see in their own time.
It is,
I don't really have time for a lot of video. We have time for a few quotes, but we like I said, generally on the back end to give you a little bit insight into what we do. We generally have 11 or 12 topic areas, and in a 3-hour stream, we only have about 15 minutes on each of them. So we do have to move at quite a brisk pace quite often.
So, on that note of moving at a brisk pace, do you want to talk about the total state and what is a total state other than me on a Sunday morning after a big drinking session the night before?
Oh, you at Auschwitz, yeah.
I when I visited Auschwitz, I had literally been drinking until 7 o'clock in the morning, all night in Krakow on a massive piss up, drinking all manner of local vodkas and sampling other kind of local cuisines and things going off in there, and then they dragged me off to Auschwitz. I felt ill. Oh
Gets
boy.
dragged off to Auschwitz.
Yeah. Yes, it's an interesting place to visit.
It is a very interesting place to visit. But no, we wanted to break down really, detaching from the propaganda aspect of a lot of the stuff to do with, totalitarianism. What actually defines a total state? What defines a state that interferes in people's lives in every aspect, really? And it's interesting because, as we'll see when we get into the next time period, it's a definition that meets more than you would think. And a lot of the distinctions that you've been told about total states are propaganda based. They really, really are. But I don't know, Trig, do you want to read this quick little summary of kind of what we've done? Because this is kind of the process we go through in talking about this.
Yeah, I mean the total state is we've got a series of bullet points here of the limited states tend towards the total states, which any state with government that is willing to vote itself more power as it goes is going to get greater and greater power and so on. Do you want me to hit the Rothbard quote, though? Yeah, let's go for what Rothbard said. Oops, that's not the right one. That's
do we have a Rothbard quote here?
No, that's the limited protective state as self-contradictory.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
We'll go through these. Said, yeah.
We'll go through these bullet points first. Consent of the governed, use of democracy to gain power is what I was saying. As long as the government can vote itself more power, it's going to. The elites of that state engage in a narrative, a construction, a zeitgeist, like for example war, to gain itself more power in the process. And an increase in the want of elites to guide production or directly control production, which we talked about with Keynesianism in particular, yes. And we are seeing it so much happening at the present moment as well with people like Biden, and his recent budget idea and cutting pipeline production in his own country whilst weaving through pipeline production in other countries. These characteristics exist within Hitler's Germany, Stalin's Russia, and FDR's America and current America and current Europe, England, America, you name it. This is going off all over the present moment. And as Plasma Rob said very, very eloquently in chat, manufactured consent of the governed is very much so, yes.
Well, when we talk about a limited state is still a state that has a government with the monopoly on justice and the monopoly on accountability as well, and the monopoly on violence. That is to get into Rothbard and more of the anarcho-capitalism side of things. A limited state is still a state, that has complete control in certain areas. It has certain monopolistic control in some areas, but not complete control in others. That's what we mean by a limited state. And the reason that we say they tend towards total states, even though that's kind of as I will get into, a bit of a deterministic statement, is because in the rhetoric of any state that we've seen, it is seen as determinist within the view of people who believe in states and the validity, the moral validity of states in general, that they see the determinism there as leading to a bigger state. So, we've talked about Hegel, we've talked about utilitarianism, we've talked about a lot of the deterministic views of history that Hegelians have, and Marxists especially have a very deterministic view of history with class struggle. But I think you can engage in some small determinism here by saying that, it's not completely predetermined, but the historical context shows us that a limited state where there is a monopoly on justice, violence, and accountability will tend towards a total state, just naturally, just as a matter of course, and crucially to sustain itself and sustain those in power.
Well, it almost can't not. The only person I have ever experienced or even read about in throughout history of governments that has actually tried to reduce regulation and thin things out is Trump. When he went, I want. If you want a regulation, you've got to show me two we want to get rid of. That sort of behaviour is unheard of.
That's rhetoric, but the thing is the state is not the leader of the state. The state
No.
is not the figurehead. It
No.
is the institutions around him, and institutions themselves, as we will see, and as we have seen, is a very important part of how this works. Is institutions tend to increase their own power because it benefits them. It is again just a complete, benefit analysis, a selfishness analysis, if you will. It's a self-interest calculation. That if you're the head of an institution, you want that institution to be more powerful. And states are made up of institutions. They may have competing remits, they may have competing personalities, they may even be in conflict with each other. But these institutions will always attempt to increase their own power because it empowers the people within them. That's one of the very basic tenets of how we see expansionist government work.
It does, and also, I mean, even just down to sort of the way small government departments work, and it seems to be the case across the board. No matter which country I've looked at, you will find that yes, we've got a budget of X this year. Make sure you spend all of it, so we can ask for X plus a little bit extra next year. Because they'll never try to save money in the budget, because that means that they won't get as much next year, and as a result they always spend that and they always ask for that plus more next, which that over any small period of time means essentially more government spending. Over a long period of time, imperceptibly over 5, 10, 20 years, suddenly you end up with budgets doubling, people having greater fiefdoms, people I get a pay rise if I have 10 people working under me, because under 8 people I'm not considered as important as I am with 10. Therefore I must get another 2 people working for me. I'll find work for them type attitudes, and it's very much. I mean, that's the case in England. And I believe it's pretty much the case, like I said, almost everywhere I've looked. So if that's at your little England level of small civil service jobs, scale that up across every single thing. Sounds like councils of the NHS. You're absolutely right, Horace. Yes, that's exactly it. And you scale that across an entire government, it means every year they're going to spend more. Every year they're going to ask for more. Every year they're going to want to dig deeper into your pocket and my pocket to pay for it.
Well, we've definitely got into the realms of the determinism of the limited state now.
Yeah.
We're definitely talking about the fact that limited states tend towards bigger states. And I don't think it's a stretch, but I think we do kind of have to add some evidence at this point.
Go for it.
And one of the big ones is tax policy and state policy. They really just do give unlimited scope, no matter how limited, to grow. There's the quote here that we'll see in The Great Fiction by Hans Hermann Hoppe. This is page 378, and if you're reading the PDF that is in the notes that we'll be providing, it's page 394. Do you want to read this quote, Trig? We'll take it in turns this time, so
Can do.
our throats don't get too dry.
Can do. I'm just taking a swig of coffee. In particular, Rothbard scorned the idea of a limited protective state as self-contradictory and incompatible with the promotion of social unity. Limited government always has the inherent tendency to become unlimited totalitarian government. Given the principle of government, judicial monopoly, and the power to tax any notion of restraining government power and safeguarding individual life and property is illusory. Under monopolistic auspices, the price of justice and protection will rise, and the quality of justice and protection will fall. A tax-funded protection agency is a contradiction in terms, an expropriating property protector, and will lead to more taxes and less protection, even if a government limited its activities exclusively to the protection of pre-existing property rights. The further question of how much security would produce would arise. And if you want to go any further than that, I think that covers it nicely.
There's a little bit here where it says motivated like everyone else by self-interest.
Yes.
And the utility of labour. Yes. But with the unique power to tax, a government agent's answer will inevitably be the same: to maximise expenditures on protection, and almost all the nation's wealth can conceivably be consumed by the cost of protection, and at the same time to minimise the production of protection. So they are, what he's saying there, they are motivated to make the night watchman state cost as much as possible. Yeah. Because they are the ones who benefit from that. It's a very, very simple calculation to make, and it's not cynical to say that once an entity gains a monopoly on something as powerful as taxation and justice, that they are essentially, they may be benevolent, but they are already in many ways a total state, because there's a lot of rhetoric that goes around about politics and economics are downstream from culture, but that's mass politics, and that is, mass ideas of economics. The ideas of the masses, yes, are downstream from culture, but the ideas of the elites are set by the elites. They exist, in this almost vacuous culture, and separate from those around them, and separate from those who are subjected to them. That in order to make change, you must first exercise power, and there is no power in culture, as it were. Where the real power lays is in those who can tax, those who hold people to account, and those who perpetrate legal violence. And that's really one of the first principles here of what Rothbard and what Hopper say about the state.
Legal violence. Yeah, and that's what the state is essentially, isn't it? Absolutely right.
It is legalized violence. It is about the self-interest of actors, and not as in screen actors, but the actors within the state. There's another quote here from Mr. Hopper as well. This is from Chapter 8 of A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism, 174 in the PDF if you're reading along. And what he says in his theory of socialism and capitalism is, if you want to click on that one, Trig, it's just near the bottom of the page, because it's kind of a chapter start, so...
Isn't it to assure the very existence?
No, it is neither an economic nor moral. I think it is there.
Oh, hold on a second. Hold on.
That's F? Chapter 8. There's two quotes there, Trig. There's the Chapter 8, and there's a bit later in Chapter 8 I'll be reading from as well. It's literally the start of Chapter 8. Sorry, I put two confusing quotes there.
Yeah. Okay, yes. I missed the first bit. Yeah, you're right. Okay, let me give you a second to cue that up in that case. Control F. Control. There we go. Yes.
It's the bottom of page 173, yeah.
It is,
If neither an economic nor moral case for socialism can be made, then socialism is reduced to an affair of merely social-psychological significance. What then are the socio-psychological foundations on which socialism rests? Or, since socialism has been defined as institutionalized policy of redistribution of property titles away from the user owners and contractors, how is it an institution that implements a more or less total expropriation of natural owners possible? If an institution exists that is allowed to appropriate property titles other than through original appropriation or contact, it must assumably damage some people who consider themselves to be the natural owners of these things. By securing by securing and possibly increasing the monetary and or non-monetary income, it reduces that of other people. Something categorically different from the situation that exists where there is contractual relationship among people in which no one gains at the expense of anyone else, but everyone profits, as otherwise there would simply not be any exchange. It's a bit dense, but what he's saying there, once again, is socialism is socialism is socialism. It's what he's saying is that if you are redistributing wealth in a non-voluntary fashion, you must be harming people. And you must be in some way misutilizing the property. It's a very, very simple thing to say, but unless you are creating a good, unless it is kind of original appropriation, quote unquote, then to redistribute property, you must be stealing from others and giving to others, and you must be the arbiter of that. So any form of socialism or any form of redistribution, either in the name of, the poor, the people, or the race, all must be predicated on the removal of property from its rightful owners. That is simply what Hopper is saying here, which again is to say that any state, no matter how quote unquote limited, who start talking about redistribution of wealth like the liberals did, that way back in 1909 with the liberal reforms, they are already engaging in an institutionalized socialist policy that has the power to greatly warp the economy and society, because they are disregarding property rights and they are disregarding the contractual obligations that other people hold to the other person. It's quite vice principle stuff, and it's a little bit dense language, but I think it's not that difficult to grasp, once you get talked through it. I don't know, Trig.
I don't know. As I've said this before, I think Hopper's relatively easy to understand, but yeah, it's exactly that. It is, as you said, it is socialism is socialism is socialism. If I've got a thing and you come along and go, oh, my mate right down the road, Bob wants a thing, I'm going to take it off you and give it to him, well, then that's, by as far as I'm concerned, theft. If Bob wants to come and ask me to borrow my thing and, and use it and he's going to give it back, that might be a whole different matter. I might be fairly amenable to that, but when you come along, point a gun on my head and go, right, I'm called state, and I'm going to take that off you, or, because he needs it, or I think he needs it, which is even worse, then, at this point, there is no respect for, human autonomy and human ability for ownership of things or anything else. And, since the days of caveman going out and whacking rabbit over the head with a club, bringing it back. If somebody had walked up and gone, no, my rabbit, thanks, fuck off, that'd have been a fight, and rightly so. There should be a fight. That squirrel, that rabbit, whatever he's caught, that's his. He's hit it. It's his. He can go and eat the food and make a pair of gloves out of the skin, as it should be.
Before we move on, there's another quick quote I want to bring out, because we need to kind of march through topics here a little bit quickly.
To assure the very existence one, is this?
Yes, it is. That's page 175 in A Theory of Socialism and Capitalism. But Hopper says, to assure its very existence, any institution that enforces a socialist theory of property must rely on the continual threat of violence. Any such institutions threatens people who are unwilling to accept its non-contractual appropriations of their natural property with physical assault, imprisonment, enslavement, or even death, and it must carry out such threats if necessary in order to stay trustworthy as the kind of institution it is.
Yeah.
Since one is dealing with an institution, an organization that is, which performs these actions on a regular basis, it is almost self-explanatory and refuses to call its own practice of doing this aggression, and instead adopts a different name for it, with neutral or possibly even positive connotations. In fact, its representatives might not even think they themselves are aggressors when acting in the name of the organization. However, it is not names or terms that matter here or elsewhere, but what they really mean.
Yeah.
So again, what he's saying is that to engage in, the redistribution of wealth, to engage in even something as simple as non-voluntary tax collection, there must be the implicit and also explicit, in many cases, threat of violence.
Yes.
And again, that is one of the ways the limited state becomes the total state, because these institutions must carry out violence to perpetuate their own existence if they are in any way socialistic.
Yeah, to use the caveman theory before. If I run up to you after you've gone and caught yourself a rabbit and hold a spear to you and go, give me that rabbit because I'm going to go and give it to Tony down the, in the next cave on, yeah, I'm being a dick. But I'm not. I'm just being what is essentially a government, because you're really good at catching rabbits. You catch 3 a day. You're eating rather well, but Tony can't, and so I'm using a threat of violence, physical violence, in real terms, the police or the KGB or, whatever various formats of police force, be them secret or non-secret, to institutionalize this. And I mean, we've seen, good God, we saw it last year over the COVID nonsense, all manner of laws being put in place. And, you end up seeing little old ladies walking their dog in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, getting tracked down by drones and being met by SWAT teams to make sure that everybody knows that the state is in control and will use whatever force it deems necessary to inflict its laws and regulations on you. And it's they can fuck off as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we're kind of getting into as well a little bit of what Hopper talks about there is the rhetoric involved in the total state.
Yes.
Because when he's talking about someone who doesn't believe they're an aggressor, you start to get into the realms of, niceties and the fact that, what is the distinction between a vigilante and a policeman? Well, one is carrying out state-sanctioned justice, and one is carrying out what he believes is his own natural justice. And you start to, the violence and the ethics and the morals there are completely transformed by terminology. The result may be the same. It may be someone who is, being killed for an action they have carried out or a grievance that they have caused. But who does the killing, and whether it is state-sanctioned or not state-sanctioned, has a massive effect on how it is perceived. And in actuality, the action itself is not different. It's one of the things I like to talk about when people, kind of get into this idea of, well, it's against the law. It's like, okay, but do you think that all laws are moral? It's one of those kind of, it's not, I don't think it's dickish, but people don't like talking about that kind of thing. People don't like talking in much more general terms. In fact, I've been accused of being deconstructivist or postmodern when I talk in those terms.
Oof.
Yeah.
That's slanderous. But no, it's important to say someone's deconstructivist as a negative thing is being unfair, because it is important to deconstruct things down to what is being. Let's have a look at whether or not these laws are moral. And whether or not they should be enforced.
Robin in the chat asks, who's the white-haired man on the placard? That is Otto von Bismarck. We talked about him in the World War I episode. He is the person most credited for unifying Germany.
Yes.
And Bismarck was wheeled out as a supposed check and balance to Hitler. Sorry, it's not Bismarck, it's Hindenburg, sorry.
Hindenburg.
Is it Hindenburg? No, it might be Bismarck. My brain's going definitely bad.
It's also difficult to spot. I know Adolf held Bismarck in very, very high regard, and sort of was very much in lament.
Yes, my brain is going. Of course, that's Otto von Bismarck. You shouldn't try and talk me out of that. That is who that is.
Yeah, no. Hitler was a big, really, really, really liked Bismarck.
Is Bismarck or is it Hindenburg? No, it is Hindenburg. My brain. Oh, god damn it. I
don't know. Do you want to change your mind a third time, or are we settled? Yeah, I think I don't know.
That is Paul von Hindenburg. I'm sorry. My brain confused those two. All Germans do look like... Well, Paul von Hindenburg does look an awful lot like Otto von Bismarck.
Well, they've got the big moustache similarity and
oh god, I'm embarrassed, guys. I'm sorry about that. That was completely me having a brain fart there. But yes, that is Hindenburg. He's one of the great heroes of Germany, and again, he was brought in as a check and balance to Hitler. And again, we will actually talk about that a bit later. It's actually in the notes. I just... brain fart moment there, but yeah, do feel free to correct me if I say the wrong thing. I meant to say Hindenburg when I said Bismarck. But yeah, it's amazing that those two were pictured together in electoral material. It's quite extraordinary how part of the political establishment Hitler became before he really seized power. He was on the. It's like us being on the ticket with someone equivalent to Winston Churchill, or it'd be like. Someone like Nick Griffin being on a poster with Tony Blair. It's quite extraordinary.
You're doing an awful lot of giving Nick Griffin an awful lot of credit there.
Well, it's such an incongruity when you think about history in that way. But anyway,
yes.
We're getting a bit off track here.
Yeah.
the rhetoric of the total state mostly is based on legitimacy, and that legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed or use of democracy, and its will of the people. But it really often translates as the tyranny of the majority. It's most people agree with me, so shut up, is how a lot of it ends up phrased. But the total state is very different than the royal state. It's actually quite different than an absolute monarch, especially in the way that it sees itself, because FDR, Hitler, and Stalin all see themselves as democratic leaders in some degree. Stalin sees himself as the embodiment of the will of the people. Hitler sees himself, again, as the embodiment of the will of the people. And FDR sees himself as the embodiment of the will of the people. It's very similar once you get into what justifies the power of someone within an overarching state that has the power to, say, like in the case of the US, just ban alcohol just outright and then start violently enforcing that. And the justification, again, is democracy.
Yes, that as an avatar of the people, I the government get to tell you how moral and how your morals should work in the case of banning alcohol, banning various substances, etc. It's the moral arbiter of the people as well. It's a nanny state to the absolute extreme at that point.
Well, the rhetoric of all these states ends up the same.
Yes.
They end up saying that because of the will of the people, we are able to do things that a large amount of the people may not like. That is, again, it might be a bit first principles for some people, but we're trying to work up from that stage and point out all the similarities between basically all the total states that will eventually take part in the Second World War. Don't worry, that is where we're getting, guys. We were supposed to be a little bit more ahead here, but like I said, we did have that a couple weeks ago, that derp. But we are trying to build up that framework here, and it's very apparent if you listen to what states say about themselves that they all view their actions as moralized by acting as the representative of the people below them. We'll come on to later some very interesting stuff about how Nazi Germany saw itself in terms of being a democracy. Same with the Soviet Union. That may surprise you, some of the rhetoric used there. But yeah, there's a great quote here, if you want to read it, Trig, that is, again, it's contained in a theory of socialism and capitalism, but it's actually referencing David Hume, who's quite an important figure, quite an important liberal figure, actually.
David Hume is one of the classic expositors of this insight. In his essay on the first principles of government, he argues, nothing appears more surprising to those who consider human affairs with a philosophical eye than the easiness with which many are governed by the few, and the implicit submission with which men resign their own sentiments and passions to those of their rulers. When we inquire by what means this wonder is effected, we shall find that as force is always on the side of the governed, the governors have nothing to support them but opinion. It is, therefore, on opinion only that the government is founded, and this maxim extends to the most despotic and most military governments, as well as the most free and most popular. The Soldan of Egypt or the Emperor of Rome might drive his harmless subjects like brute beasts against their sentiments and inclinations, but he must at least have led his Mamelukes or Praetorian bands like men by their opinion.
It's a very prescient. It's a very prescient point.
Yes.
It is very nicely put. It's a prescient point that the state doesn't have the resources to carry out absolute violence. They are not the majority, but
not even close.
It is the belief in their ability to do so within a total state that keeps a lot of people in line, or it's the belief in the process that keeps a lot of people in line. It's much easier, as we'll get to when we talk about some of the managerialism stuff, and some of Burnham's work as filtered mostly through Sam Francis, because I don't want to shit on Burnham because he's done quite a lot of good stuff, but he was a little bit all over the place. I think Leviathan and its Enemies is much better framed than some of his work, because it's later, obviously, with the benefit of hindsight. But he really does talk about the fact that when you get someone like a managerialist, it's much easier to trick people into submitting to a total state through the illusion of democracy and free speech, and to keep some of these trappings than to just go whole hog and be a mask off despot. You may have to in the end, but it's much easier to lie to people and try and convince them that they still live in a free society, whilst they don't. It's quite a powerful illusion to maintain, and that's what he's saying here. That all power really is illusionary. It's like Britain ruled India with a bicycle and a whistle. It's the same way that that someone like Boris Johnson or Joe Biden supposedly rules the US or the UK. They don't actually have the power to put down a popular uprising. In fact, I'd say that the government has less power to do so now than it did in the past in many ways. It does not fare well against physical security threats, but where it does fare is making itself an illusionary threat. It's by making itself look bigger and scarier than it really is, all by convincing enough people they have a big enough stake in the process to allow them to perpetuate it.
It's so true. It is so true, though. I mean, it wouldn't take. It would take significantly less than the population of one city in any given country. If that population of one city, that 1 million people, or give or take, decided to go, nah, we're not having any more of this. We're marching and we're going to kick you out. There's not many governments in the world. I mean, you would have to be a severely totalitarian government with a very significant amount of backing by your military to start being able to put down that many people. You'd end up having your own military turn against you because nobody likes shooting their aunt and uncle, and that's what the military would be asked to be doing in that situation. You'd have the police and the military would turn against the state, and at that point, it all goes a bit Pete Tong, which is why the whole EU government and having an EU army and having French soldiers governing the Germans and so on and so forth is how the EU will very soon clamp down significantly on people. Although I think it will be German soldiers policing the French, actually, to be perfectly honest on that front in the very near future. But yeah, that's you use foreign mercenaries to govern a country if things get really, really iffy, and a population can very easily rise up and very easily turn around to a government and say no. The fact is, though, they don't.
They don't. Is more often than not. It takes a lot of impetus to do so.
Oh, fuck yeah.
There is another quote here. I'm going to frame it a little bit, though, by saying that when you look at FDR, when you look at Hitler, when you look at Stalin, what they all do is couch much of their rhetoric in socialistic terms. They couch it in the idea that they are for the quote-unquote normal countrymen. They are for, the majority. They are for, the little guy. They are for you. And they are willing to redistribute wealth for you. And they are willing to rebuild your faith in your nation. And that they may be more nationalistic or in certain degrees, or they may have different trappings, but a lot of what they talk about is really a form of socialism. So what Hopper goes on to say on very bottom of page 55 in a theory of socialism and capitalism, in chapter 4, socialism, democratic style is, he's talking about social democracy versus hard socialism. Both types of socialism, to be sure, derive from the same ideological sources. Both are egalitarian in motivation, at least in theory, and both have essentially the same ultimate goal: the abolishment of capitalism as a social system based on private ownership and the establishment of a new society, characterized by brotherly solidarity and the eradication of scarcity, a society in which everyone is paid according to his needs. From the very beginning of socialist movements in the mid-19th century, though, there have been conflicting ideas on what methods best suited achieving these goals. So what you can see in the differences between FDR, Hitler, and Stalin is that they have competing versions of socialism. This is something that will come up again and again in a lot of different works here, but it is a very important notion that they share a vast amount of similarities in their rhetoric and a vast amount of similarities in their methods, but the conflict comes on the minutiae of the type of socialism that they want to implement.
Yes. It's the according to his needs always bothers me slightly. That's very. I've always enjoyed the idea of people being paid according to what they have produced, not their needs. Their needs sounds like way too much government getting involved and you getting what they determine you are worth rather than the value of what you have produced, which, it does differ from person to person. And this is where socialism and I. Well, it's not where we start. It's one of the many reasons why I hate socialism. It's who determines need. I might think I need to rule the country, but I don't think the people in power would agree with me.
It's not only who determines need; it's also the methods by which they determine need.
Yeah,
that is the other big point here, which I think is kind of you're neatly leading us into again, Trig. You're doing a bit of a lead in here, but the way in which this is decided is by the class of managerialists.
Yes.
There is a purveyance of managerialism here. What we see, especially in the quote-unquote Western democracies, is the idea that if you just vote for these people, they can plan the economy in a way that benefits you. And that's where the socialistic aspect really comes from. Whether you agree that Britain and America are socialist at this point or not, you must see that, to a greater or more minor degree, they are still quite heavily planned economies because of the way the central banking and monetary policy and economic policy works. They are no longer, as we've walked you through in this series, they are no longer free market economies to a great degree. They have a large amount of, monetary policy that they can implement. And once you start planning things like that, you really do move out of the realms of a market economy. It's quite a simple thing to talk about, but once you have a class of people who are the quote-unquote managers of the country, they manage the economy, they manage the society, it doesn't matter what rhetoric is around it, you have, again, a form of socialism and a form of, for a total state. You at least have the apparatus there for a total state.
Yes. It is only a matter of... It is the tools that tyrants would need, even if the state itself is not tyrannical now. If you have put all the tools in place under a benevolent and demure government, the next one that comes in that is tyrannical, if it has all the tools it needs, then, you've done its work for it.
Well, planned economies are explicit within Marxist theory.
Yes.
There is no market in Marxism. The economy is completely planned, and what is meted out to the worker is done so entirely by the state. But as we went through in the Keynesianism special, Keynesian economics is how FDR and Hitler both planned, how to get themselves out of the Great Depression. We'll get to it a bit more in the time period when we get to some of the, actual policies FDR held. But there is a lot to be said, and we'll be saying it later on in this stream too, about the way that Hitler embraced Keynesian theory.
Yes.
That what happens here is, again, it is quibbling over minutiae, because FDR and Hitler are both true believers in Keynesianism through their actions. You can show that. And someone like Stalin is, he might not be a true believer, but he exercises the Marxist idea of a fully planned and managed economy, quote unquote, for the people as a way to retain power. All of these people engage in economic planning. And I can't remember whose turn it is to read a quote, Trick.
I don't know. All I'm thinking is, when we get to the quote from Mein Kampf, I have to read that. I've been working on my dodgy Hitler quote voice all day. But if you want to take this one, I think I did the last one. Or did I do the last one? No, I think you
I
might
think
have
I
done.
did the last one,
You did
Craig.
the last
So
one.
I did do the last one because you were talking about according to his needs.
That's
So
right.
it's
Yes, of course. Okay, so let's. Oops, I'll have to
we
transition
are on.
that over there.
Yeah, I will quickly let people know where we are. We are actually reading from Mises here. We are reading from Omnipotent Government: The Rise of the Total State and Total War, which is a great book to read just in general about the interest of this topic. This is page 240 in the book and page 252 in the PDF we are using, which will be provided in the show notes that we do for each of these episodes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it starts here with as planning is the antithesis is where you've notated it. But as you can see there, dealing with domestic affairs, planning is used as a synonym for socialism, and it goes on there. But we'll get to the point as where planning is the antithesis of free enterprise and private ownership of the means of production. Planning and capitalism are utterly incompatible. Within a system of planning, production is conducted according to the government's orders, not according to the plans of the capitalist entrepreneurs eager to profit by best serving the wants of consumers. It is a delusion to believe that planning and free enterprise can be reconciled. No compromise is possible between the two methods. Where various enterprises are free to decide what to produce and how, there is capitalism. Where, on the other hand, the government authorities do the directing, there is socialist planning. Then the various firms are no longer capitalist enterprises. They are subordinate state organs bound to obey orders. The former entrepreneur becomes the shop manager, like the Betriebsführer in Nazi Germany. Yeah. The idea of planning by the organized groups of the various branches of production is very popular with some businessmen. Sorry, yes. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I think
I think you get that right, yeah.
Betriebsführer.
What he's describing here is that any level of economic planning, you are no longer, engaging in market economics.
Yeah.
You are engaging in eventually a totalitarian enterprise. Or if you are setting monetary policy, then all businesses through that end up becoming an extension of that state policy. That you no longer have an economy, you have a planned economy, quote unquote. And you no longer have a market, you just have policy and policy instruments. And that is, that is the same as what happened in Nazi Germany. People talk about Nazi Germany being capitalistic, but to say that it was a free market economy is ridiculous.
No, absolutely
it was very much a total state economically, as well as politically and culturally. That part is often, papered over when we talk about the time period. But he's right. And when we talk about the interventionism of someone like FDR, he's still engaging in economic planning. And Mises is categoric about this. And he's categoric for a reason, because it's very self-evident when you see all of the episodes we've talked about in the series so far of direct intervention in the economy by policy instruments or by central banks. It always leads to a disaster, or it is always in the pursuit of something that is disastrous, like the First World War. There has not been a case here, as is put forward with a New Deal, falsely, that the intervention by a government has actually brought about the kind of, mass transcendent benefit that it's supposed to.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is it. The moment you've got government organising, I mean, whoever thought government should organise economic factors is a madman anyway. The government is barely capable of organising itself. It is, when the government is operating at its best throughout history, it is a group of intellectuals mulling over the pros and cons of some ideal, and if they can all come to an agreement, passing that as some sort of policy. Whereas the economy and the economics and the market is constantly reacting. It is constantly, okay, it's getting cold out. I better quickly go and knock together some blankets so I can get them to market on Sunday because I know it's going to be cold next week. It's a matter of being able to react rapidly. The government can't react rapidly because the government takes 6 months at best to come up with anything. It is always the government is almost always, when it's trying to act, 6 months, a year, whenever, behind when it probably needed to, at best. It cannot be, because it is a debate system for a start. It is something where they will discuss something for a year, perhaps two, in an ideal world, certainly, to
Yes.
get something pushed forward. To really think things through. And the market needs to be, oh crap, I've run out of grapes, better go find a new supplier of grapes. Because, it's coming to the summer and people want grapes and cream and whatever. I don't know. I don't know why I'm taught grapes then, but whatever it is, it's not a planned thing. There is a little bit of planning, but it's more about having a varied a breadth of suppliers is the best you can do as far as planning is concerned.
It's like what we talked about this very heavily. If you've not seen it, do watch our Keynesism special, because we will get on just after this quick point to some of the specifics of the time period, because we are talking in very general terms now.
Yes.
Well, we're still talking in very general terms. We're trying to lay out as broadly as possible, without discussing specifics, how a total state operates and how a total state functions, and the trappings of the total state and the way the total state puts its way forward. But if you are not engaging in the market, if you are not letting people decide themselves how they want to interact, which is what the market is, people spit on it and talk about it as a dirty word, but that's what it is. It is people interacting with each other in a voluntary fashion. That is a pure market. But when you get someone who's engaging in planning and managerialism, it must be towards some other end. They do not want to maximize what individuals would like to purchase from each other, or the exchanges individuals would like to make. There must be another, and often put forward as higher, goal in that. That is what macroeconomics is. Macroeconomics is really the lionizing of the manager and the managerialist as somebody who can swoop down and save the people from their own ignorance. I think that's really what Mises is saying here, that anyone who sees themselves as, a instrument of monetary policy, or sees monetary policy as a way of bringing about sweeping good, really thinks that people are too stupid and too dishonest to interact in a mutually beneficial way. And I think that's one of the biggest unspoken things when we talk about Keynesism, when we talk about economic planning in general, is that it assumes that the planner and the technocrat is mentally superior to the individual, that he is so far above the normal person that he knows better how they should interact economically than they do.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it is not unfamiliar for anyone to think that there are people in politics that act as if they know better than the average prole or pleb or whatever horrendous term they might throw out the common man, in a way of denigrating them. But we the people, to use America's, we do know what I know what I want. I know I might want a steak tonight or tomorrow night, or I might want fish and chips later. But I don't want the government. I don't want whoever's in charge of the government telling me what I want. I know better than you. What you need is this green protein shake. That's what you want. No, I don't. Go away with your horrible Soylent Green.
Well, as we get into the stuff about Keynesism and Hitler,
yes.
It's so appealing to somebody like Hitler, or somebody who is wanting to create this total transcendent society that people subsume themselves to. It is a godsend for him that something like Keynesianism presupposes that the planner knows better than the individual. Because an outward total state, a total state that's reached maturity like Nazi Germany, or like Stalin's Russia, that is willing to openly say, all of these things, that they know better because they are bringing about paradise on earth through their ideology. Keynesianism is a godsend to them, because again, it's presupposed on the idea that those in charge know better. There's no simpler way to put that. And that's why it's so powerful, again, for someone like FDR. He may not use the same rhetoric, he may couch it in slightly softer terms, but when it comes to the hard power of it, what the New Deal, what Germany's supposed economic miracle under Hitler, and what the 5-year plan under Stalin all says is that, essentially these are economic Übermenches, and you need to listen to them purely because they are in charge and they are the planner.
Yeah. And you don't even get to see what their qualifications are. More often than not, you've just voted for the guy at the top and he's stuck his mates in that particular job, which is why you've seen places like Venezuela collapse into total calamity from what should be. I mean, there's a country that should be one of the most wealthy countries in South America, but because of centralized planning and an economy, they don't have anyone that knows how to run the oil pumps and pump and generally create the wealth that country is literally swimming on top of, because of centralized planning and jobs for the boys by a despotic bunch of communists. Nearly made some sort of statement about tacos there, but oh no, I did it anyway. Yep, and we've got.
There's an article here from Llewellyn Rockwell.
Yes.
Who actually, my girlfriend got a bug through the post that had a nice little pamphlet written by him about Austrian economics. I think it's from like 2009. It's from a little bit of time ago. But Llewellyn Rockwell, if you want to look at his author page on the Mises Institute, is very prolific. I can't speak. I can never say that word on stream. And he's done a lot of good stuff. But this is his article on the Mises Institute website about Hitler's economics. I'm not quite sure where to start this from, honestly, because he talks about the fact that a lot of he actually quotes the Anti-Defamation League.
He does. Yeah.
He talks about the fact that they say that regardless of economic arguments, Hitler's economic policies cannot be divorced from his policies of virulent anti-Semitism, racism, and genocide. And he then goes on to say that the ADL, the tendency of economists to admire Hitler's economic program is the case in point. And it's funny that a lot of people will say, they'll make the apologist argument that yes, Hitler was bad, but he did revive the German economy, which he really didn't. If you look at the minutiae of it, he essentially set the American economy, set the German economy on fire, and then told everyone that's why he'd made them all warm. He did.
Yeah, that's about right.
Hitler's massive credit expansionism and his massive public spending policy set Germany on a path to self-destruction without the later expansionism. Hitler didn't go into Czechoslovakia. He didn't go into the Rhineland. He didn't try and unite the quote-unquote German-speaking peoples purely for ideological reasons. He did it because without doing that, Germany's economic miracle would have collapsed. It needed constant outward expansion to maintain this fierce pace. And that is the other side of the proto-Keynesian, socialist economics of all this. It really is the fact that, Hitler, it says it in a quote here, Hitler found a cure against unemployment before Keynes was finished explaining it. Because all he did was burn up massive cash reserves, print lots of money, undergo credit expansion, force people to buy bonds, and then to maintain this economic miracle started invading countries.
Yes, but there is something to be said. Having had the opportunity to read through his autobiography, shall we, to put it in the way that the BBC phrased it the other day, Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf. I read. There is you definitely get the impression, reading certainly the first half, first third of it, Hitler was very, very definitely pro nationalizing and unifying the German-speaking world. So to say, he didn't do it for any ideology, he did. He definitely had an ideological reason, but it was certainly a good opportunity to get everything working in his. Yeah.
I'm not saying it was purely economic. I'm saying the function is that it's the same. You have to do both.
Yeah.
And one, whether you can say it's a justification or not, or whether he was a true believer, is immaterial. Functionally, what he did was he had to be expansionist to keep the whole thing going.
Yes. Oh, without a doubt. Yes.
There's a smoking gun here as well, which talks about Keynes himself admired the Nazi economic program, writing in the foreword to the German edition to his general theory, the theory of output as a whole, which is what the following book purports to provide, is much more easily adapted to the conditions of a totalitarian state than to the theory of production and distribution of a given output produced under the conditions of a free competition and a large measure of laissez-faire. Keynes's comment, which may shock many, did not come out of the blue. Hitler's economists regarded laissez-faire and rejected laissez-faire and admired Keynes, even foreshadowing him in many ways. Similarly, Keynesians admired Hitler. See George Gravy, Keynes and the Economic Activists of Pre-Hitler Germany, The Journal of Political Economy, Volume 83.
That's George Garvey, not Gravy, but yes.
Sorry, George Garvey.
Yes.
I cannot speak today.
No, it's the A and the R is that yes. I too suffer from the dyslexia, dude. It's okay. It's obvious that he does though. After we're talking about Keynes, you look at what Keynes was espousing of state control, and that's exactly what Hitler was doing. Hitler had nothing but state control of the economy. The idea of them being in agreement with one another is hard. It shouldn't be surprising. Anyone that defines it surprising isn't understanding the source. What I find surprising is the fact that we carried on with Keynesianism after decrying the despotism of the National Socialist government of Germany during that time.
Again, later in the article it says perhaps the worst part of all the US's, he talks about the New Deal policies, is that they are inconceivable without a Leviathan state, exactly as Keynes said. A government big and powerful enough to manipulate aggregate demand is big and powerful enough to violate people's civil liberties and attack their rights in every other way. Keynesianism or Hitlerian policies unleash the sword of the state on the whole population. Central planning, even in its most petty variety and freedom, are incompatible. Again, he's mirroring what Mises said and demonstrating it in that to implement Keynesianism, you have to have a total state because it requires the power to plan and manipulate prices. Otherwise, the kind of utopia can't come about. You can't reach equilibrium, quote unquote, without the power to manipulate the market. And once a government is powerful enough to, strong arm an economy in its totality, again, they are strong enough to violate people's civil liberties and attack their rights in every other way, as he says there. Hitler's total power is first predicated on his total economic power.
Without a doubt. And so many governments are in that position. All governments are in that position now.
So people are just laughing at my George Gravy comment. I think I might just be hungry.
You see, I was playing the big tendy chess move earlier, in that I had some chicken tendies and a jacket potato about half an hour before we started, because I am living the meme literally at the present moment. I have my final Wagyu burger waiting to be made for when we finish this, or tomorrow, depending on whatever. But oof, I tell you, those were some good burgers. So we're gonna have to get some of those in for a barbecue at some point. Okay.
It's a point of history as well. It's a point of history that is whitewashed. That Keynes was very popular in Germany and was very fond of Nazi-era Germany. He saw it as the purest expression of his theories at the time. There's another Mises daily article by James L. Martin, actually just called Keynesianism Loves the Total State, where it talks about the fact that general theory was published in the German language as late as 1936, with very, very, wrote a special foreword addressed to German readers, and that was really one of the heights of National Socialism. Yeah, he said it's 4 months short of being 4 years in power in Germany. We're not at an early stage here. You can already see a lot of the, Kristallnacht style stuff coming about.
Oh yeah.
This is not somebody who is speaking from a point of ignorance. This is somebody who is speaking from a point of seeing Nazi Germany's policies and going, yes, that is definitely an expression of what I was saying. It's very strange. It's very strange to have, again, this very, very positive forward, even talking directly to the Nazi instincts of the German people. And for Keynes to still be lionized as this, great, great theorist and this great prophet of the economics of the modern era, because the hat tip there really is that the economics of FDR's New Deal era America, which is praised as this great example of Keynesianism working, is the exact economics of Adolf Hitler. It is 1-for-1, and to implement it, FDR must start to gain, as we see, some of the overstep and total power that Adolf Hitler had, because you cannot implement these policies without a total state.
No. Well, people would not let you. The market does not work without a total. This type of market does not work without a total state. People suddenly go, no, I want chicken tendies. I will not eat your green paste, or whatever it is. People have wants and needs and drive themselves out of this. We've actually had a looked at a super chat. Yes.
That's actually quite opportune. There's a super chat here from Thug Life Bear saying, explain slowly how reverse Burr works. If they increase the value of currency by removing it from circulation, why not do it all the time? What's the catch? Well, you're supposed to have stability in currency. That's what people want. The catch would be that they couldn't implement a lot of their monetary policy stuff. But if you were to do it in a reverse Burr situation in which you were having mass rapid deflation, that does have many of the same problems of mass rapid inflation. In that it is a very sudden change in the value of money, which people don't like and shouldn't really happen under regular market conditions. You may have some small adjustments, but having a policy of deflationism has many mirrored negative effects of a policy of inflationism. What you really should have is a policy of stable markets, which, as we saw when we looked at the graphs of the Industrial Revolution period, that was a period of very, very slow and minor deflation. It wasn't one of sharp shocks either way. But what we see with monetary policy, and Keynesianism especially, is the fact that you have an inflationist policy, which is just as damaging as a deflationist policy. What you do is you shouldn't be manipulating in the market, stupid, is what I would say. You don't lean on the scales. You let people interact economically as they want to interact. And that is how you bring about the biggest economic freedom. At least that's what Austrian economics says, and I'm quite inclined to agree with that. That would be my answer anyway.
I mean, Yiz sort of makes a comment there to our knowledge that currency is removed in America. Same in England. There are people that literally whose job it is to shovel money into a fire at the Royal Mint. That's not the removal of money from the system, though. That is allowing the mint to produce new notes, because old notes are getting old, manky, and there's too much cocaine embedded into them for them to etc.
We're going to need to move on to the very spicy subjects of Hitler and international finance quite soon, but I think part of the problem there is people thinking of money as purely notes.
Yeah.
Where money now is mostly either digitally stored assets, they are just numbers on balance sheets, or it is what is referred to as fiduciary media, which we talked about a little bit in Monday's upload on this channel about the housing bubble. That a lot of what Keynesianism does, and a lot of what kind of Hitlerian, let's say, Keynesianism did, was the production of fiduciary media. It's things like bonds, it's things like credit derivatives, it's things like packaged up mortgages, like we talked about there. You don't just increase the money supply by increasing actual notes. What you have is the fact that you have all of these things that people believe are money. And as fiat currency goes, if you believe something is money, it is money within a fiat system. If you believe it has monetary value, it does have monetary value. So I think you would be less confused. I know it's not a completely serious question, but if you're thinking about economics in that way, and if you're thinking about deflation and removal of the money supply, what you'd have to do is you'd have to strip financial institutions of assets on their balance sheets that were created by the state, which would create absolute chaos, because people would soon realize that these financial institutions could not stand up to the inflationist, bonds and the inflationist fiduciary media being removed from their balance sheets, because that is what is propping them up and nothing else. But anyway, that's my slightly longer form answer.
Fair. You said Hitler and international finance.
Yes.
Whatever you mean.
Again, it's something we don't have time to cover in its entirety. And
No.
I couldn't work it in without making this stream like 7 hours. But we need to talk about Sutton like we did last time. And
should we jump straight to Sutton rather than the outlook? Yeah, okay, let's jump straight to Sutton. It's because you've got chapter 12, the conclusions of this is Sutton's Wall Street and Hitler, which is not one we've used before up until now.
No, we will be using it a bit more going forward. But here is we have to talk about it very briefly. I would just recommend going and reading it. Honestly,
it's actually not very. It's not a gigantic tome. No. It is only it's 148 pages as a PDF. It's not terrifying. This one.
And we're not going to justify what we're saying here because Sutton does it. Like go and read Sutton. It's literally like 148 pages of him going, "I have the receipts, motherfuckers." Like that's what he's saying,
and he really does. So we found a video of him talking in an interview. It was back in it was either the late 70s or early 80s, because I think he's unfortunately passed away not so long ago now. But he's a very very well-informed person, and he literally tracked down. He literally looked at the receipts. He knew his stuff, and he put it all in here. So,
what he said, chapter 12 is his conclusions, and he said, "We have demonstrated with documentary evidence a number of critical associations between Wall Street, international bankers, and the rise of Nazism in Germany. First, that Wall Street financed the German cartels in the mid-20s, which in turn proceeded to bring Hitler to power. That's important as well because those were also people who were funded by the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan, in that the economic conditions that led to Hitler's rise were an affectation of one, American aid, two, American policy under Woodrow Wilson to try and rectify the reparations situation, or a continuation at least of his policy, and three, of the Federal Reserve's investment in Germany at that time. And you can see that Wall Street itself, under the Fed, is not a credible independent entity. In fact, it's very much led by these quasi-governmental organizations. He goes on to say, second, that the financing for Hitler and the SS street thugs came in part from affiliates or subsidiaries of US firms, including Henry Ford, payments by I.G. Farben and General Electric, followed by the Standard Oil of New Jersey and ITT subsidiary payments of Heinrich Himmler up to 1944. Third, the US multinationals under the control of Wall Street profited handsomely from Hitler's military construction program in the 1930s, and at least until 1942. Fourth, that the same international bankers used political influence in the US to cover up their wartime collaboration, and to do this infiltrated the US Control Commission for Germany. Our evidence, it goes on to say that the evidence can be summarized as follows. He talks about General Electric, I.G. Farben, and, their involvement, and the fact that I.G. Farben, which was the real big company behind the German war machine, was essentially set up by American companies and outside companies. They talk about Wall Street and the bankers, and incidentally, a lot of these bankers are the same people who were involved in the setting up of the Federal Reserve. The Wall Street and the US banks is what makes up the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve has a national mandate. These people are political powers. They are in the halls of power. These are not, purely marketeers, as people will lead you to believe.
Yeah, I mean, there was actually cases of I know for a fact Ford and I believe General Electric did it as well, where they were literally giving Bomber Command instructions as to which areas to bomb to make sure that they didn't get their factories bombed. So literally, oh yeah, you can bomb these factories over here, but don't stray across the Rhine onto this side because that's where the Ford and the GE factories are, and we wouldn't want you blowing those up, would we now? So so there was some fairly horrendous stuff actually in many respects. What was going off? It wasn't just they were helping Germany during the war effort and having factories over there. They were actively using American and British bomber command to literally destroy their rivals in Germany at the time as well, which is quite wild when you think about that. That this total war that was happening was, in some respects, a literal hostile takeover of different companies over in Germany whilst it was happening. Literally, sort of, hit these guys. They produce a nice tractor. We don't want them around.
The problem is that General Electric and a lot of the people involved in General Electric, which were heavily involved in the Nazi project, ran from the same offices as Roosevelt and a lot of the Democratic campaign did in New York.
Yeah.
There's a great thing in here. It talks about several Roosevelt associates, including Teagle of Standard Oil and the Warburg family and General Swope. It's all of Roosevelt's friends participated in the Reichstag fire. Yeah. The composition of the Nazi Inner Circle during World War II and the financial contribution of Standard Oil of New Jersey and ITC subsidiaries were traced in Chapter 9. Yeah, documented proof of these monetary contributions is presented. It's all there. Kurt von Schrader is identified as the key intermediary in the SS slush fund. All of these members of the U.S. financial establishment who walk in and out interchangeably of quasi-governmental organizations and posts, and sometimes, as with the Warburgs and many people involved in General Electric and the Federal Reserve, explicit government posts, are involved in the rise of Hitler. They are the same people financing him, and it is almost an extension of America's interest in revitalizing Germany as, a controlled regional power as a counterbalance to people like the British and the Russians. What they are doing is, as they did with Russia during the period where they set up the Bolsheviks and Lenin, they trained his troops, as we talked about during that episode. They are playing kingmaker with Nazi Germany. And as we talked about with the Trading with the Enemy Act, with all of the new powers the president has over economic policy, especially when it comes to international trade, Roosevelt, with his enhanced power, could have stepped in at any moment and declared Germany an enemy nation that could not be traded with. He had that power, and yet his inner circle was consistently trading with the Nazis right up until, 1942 in many cases, in some cases 1944. It's quite amazing to see all this stuff.
Yeah, and they weren't just in bed with the Nazis; they were in bed with the Bolsheviks as well. It really Sutton's work has been. I enjoy Mises' work. I enjoy the way, the framing of Hopper and so on. But really, honestly, Anthony Sutton's work on the Bolsheviks and Wall Street and Hitler and Wall Street have really it was a real black pill reading through this stuff. It really was. It really was a case of, I mean, you kind of know it, but having it put through, and and here's the receipts. This happened on this day through this house, through this particular place that are involved with all of these names, and it's there's always J.P. fucking Morgan. Excuse my French, but good God, Jean-Pierre Point Morgan is always in there. How that man, and that company, ugh. Sorry, a personal favorite of mine to hate is J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan, he's almost like the international finance version of someone like Roosevelt or someone like Woodrow Wilson. He is one of these figures who is consistently involved in what can only be described as evil.
I was going to say he's
And
basically Emperor Palpatine IRL. Yeah, and don't even get me started on him and Tesla.
There's a great point made, which we will get to when we get to the post-war and things like the Nuremberg trials, that none of these people, no one from General Electric, no one from the US side of funding IG-Farben, no one from people like Ford or IBM or General Electric or any of those people were ever put on trial.
No,
Nobody who funded Hitler on the US side of things, nobody who was part of the establishment in the US who went out of their way to support the Nazis was brought to justice. They were not even part of the debate. No one wanted to talk about where Hitler's money came from. Where did, his supposed economic miracle come from? And the answer was expansionist, aggressive policy at home and the influx of international finance and business as directed by entities like the Federal Reserve and as encouraged by US policy towards Germany at the time through the Dawes-Young Plan and as a way to revitalize Germany as a regional ally and as a total state experiment. They saw them as, almost like economic brothers. There's a lot of very positive contemporary rhetoric when it comes to the Nazis, and as we'll get to when it comes to especially the Soviets.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Trig, if I'm getting a little long in the tooth here, but there's something I want to mention before you actually do a quote from Hitler's autobiography. It's quite revealing how he switches the way he talks about international finance.
Oh, yeah.
I know you want to get to that, but there was actually a book that was written. Let me actually get the date on that very, very quickly because I want to find it. It's a book called Nazi Nexus, and what it does is it basically steals Sutton's work in 2009, many years afterwards, and fiddles around with the parameters and doesn't explicitly talk about how these people were members of the political establishment or members of the Federal Reserve or that they interchangeably walk between those posts. It's basically a neutered version of Wall Street and Hitler, and it says that free market capitalism and free marketeers are responsible for the rise of Hitler, and that Hitler's, basically he says capitalism did the Holocaust. And he even tries to draw parallels between libertarians and Nazis.
What?
Yeah. Or at least implicitly. Because I came to contact with someone who said that they were, quote unquote, researching this the nexus or the alliance between Nazis and libertarians, and that this book had opened their eyes that people who want free markets have nothing to say when those free markets are used for evil, and that they are incapable of actually looking at the evidence that someone like Sutton presents, where it is incredibly clear that something as invested in the machinery of economic politics in America, like General Electric, which is, again, I will keep stressing this point, is a quasi-governmental organization, is the exact organization responsible for this investment. It is unconscionable to say that a free market is what caused the rise of Hitler, rather than the economic interventionism of the US and them playing kingmaker with these states.
Libertarian Nazis.
It's
libertarian totalitarian. Won't watch. I mean, I don't know if you know what one of those words means, but they're somewhat contradictory. Yeah. Wow.
And it's funny to see someone who is essentially a soft socialist, when I look into this guy, talking about essentially Sutton's work. But he's deliberately misleading people.
He's not a soft socialist. He is a snake in the he is pretending to be a soft socialist, but espousing quite hard socialist and pro-socialist propaganda and obscurantism in the process. He's a propagandist. That's not soft socialism. He's just a snake. He's not honest enough to own up to whom he is.
It goes 90% of the way there, and it doesn't bring into focus a lot of the stuff that Sutton does. Like I said, it is basically ripped off because he did. This is 2009. This isn't.
Yeah.
I think Sutton did this work in the 70s.
It's 70s and 80s. I think he was.
Yes.
I think yes, popped his clogs in the late 90s. I think sadly. Yes. And yeah, so shall we get onto the austere
Yes,
German painter
yeah, we're
himself?
a little bit behind on time here, so yes.
Go on then. Okay, now this is page 136 in Mein Kampf, so it's towards the end of the first third, if you will, of it. Which, I mean, the first third is essentially, my days as a young boy and why I like Germany. He hasn't gone completely, shall we say, unhinged and started mentioning a certain three-letter word a lot. I did a word search. 547 times he mentions that specific three-letter word, and in a book that is something like 400 pages. It is quite. He does go off the rails a little bit on that front, but here we go. I've got it up here. Now this is for the first time in my life, I heard a basic outline explaining the workings of international finance and loan capital. When I heard Feder's first lecture, the idea instantly flashed through my mind that I had now found a way to accomplish one of the key essentials needed in the foundation of a new party. In my mind, Feder's merit was demonstrated in his ruthless and vigorous method of describing the double character of the finances used in stock exchanges and known transactions. He laid bare the fact that this capital is always dependent on the payment of interest. His explanations of the basic questions were so sound that from the start, his critics could not dispute the theoretical correctness of the idea, but they doubted the possibility that it could be carried out. What others considered a weakness in Feder's argument, I thought was a strong point.
Sorry, I had to mute myself for laughing now.
So I told you you've been practicing.
Oh, that's quite a funny trick. That is very funny.
I'd got the whole arm waving. You have to wave the arm when you're doing that.
You've got to actually gesticulate, yes.
Oh, I enjoyed doing that. Right, yes, he was quite pro international finance, as you can tell. I need to sit down. I need a drink, actually.
No breaks in this train, Trig. There's no drinks till bedtime.
No drink. No, absolutely not. Right, yes, but I think that does quite sort of well encapsulate the encapsulates the fact that Hitler was somewhat of a fan of Keynesianism. Yes.
It's also a hat tip as well that the fact that a lot of what Hitler said about international finance, he was talking out both sides of his face because he knew its power firsthand because he was receiving a lot of it. It's quite an amazing point of history that the Nazis they had a lot of rhetoric about it, but they were as guilty as everyone else, if not more so, than participating in the mass taping together of the central banks and the mass kind of movement of international finance through international financiers. Is a big point of hypocrisy of the Nazi regime to rail against those forces and then embrace them so wholeheartedly, to achieve their own ends. There's another big aspect here that I want to talk about. I think we've successfully proved, again, read something if you don't believe me, that Hitler and Nazi Germany were considered part of the plan. They were considered an indispensable part of this international community that should be embraced, traded with, economically supported, and, they are not pariahs in this period. They are not pariahs in any sense in this period. In fact, up until he starts going rogue, Hitler's also almost seen as like our guy.
Oh yeah.
He's seen as someone who was quite rightfully revitalized Germany, and then was kind of had a bit of a sigh of relief. And thank God Germany's doing better. We might have had some trouble there otherwise.
Oh yes, I mean even up until when was it? It was even when did Chamberlain finally get booted out for being a complete wimp? because he was there going, "Oh, I was with a piece of paper.
That was
Look, I've
that was
spoken to Mr.
1939.
I've spoken to Mr. Hitler. He's a very nice chap. I had a good cup of coffee and some bratwurst and some beer, and we signed a piece of paper, and we're going to be the best of friends. Oh no, he's invaded Poland."
Yeah, well, last week we talked about Lloyd George. We talked about his fact that he wrote the "I Spoke with Hitler" article. That he was one of Hitler's biggest kind of proponents in the UK. It's quite amazing. Again, Hitler was a part of pre-World War II globalism, and the other globalists extolled the virtues of Adolf Hitler. That is what happened, and they again supported him economically. But the other big aspect as well is that the Nazis saw themselves as democratic. They saw themselves as an expression of the people's will. They gained power through the electoral system. No one could claim that the 1933 election that really solidified their power was free or fair, but it still stuck to the trappings of democracy. And really, when you get into how a state conducts elections, a free and fair election is whatever the state says it is. They completely set the parameters of what the election is, as we saw in 2020. Even some tweaking of who votes where can massively change the results. And it was still an election, and it was still as they claimed it to be, since they have the monopoly on accountability, and they have the monopoly on justice. Within Germany itself, it was a quote-unquote free and fair election by their own terms, because under the power of a total state, who can say otherwise?
Well, quite. And there we go. Actually, we've got the
old liberty or equality. Yeah, but
liberty or equality. Yes, you can do this one. I'm still recovering from my
that was
my exuberance.
Well done. We're all very impressed. No, the Liberty or Equality is an indispensable book. I think the more I read it, the more it's this with Leviathan and its enemies is becoming one of my favorites because of the power of the language that it uses. And I think there's something to be said about a lot of books that came out pre-1950 that they have these much larger vocabularies where they're able to express things in a way that we are not able to these days. Unfortunately, we've fallen in, I think, into a bit of a trap of newspeak, in that a lot of ways of looking at things are just simply kind of removed from us because we don't have the language for them anymore. It's quite sad in many ways, I think.
People don't read books anymore, dude. It's as simple as that. They watch TV, they watch the Netflix, they listen to the YouTube video, and the YouTube video is often, much as I like PewDiePie and etc., it's screeching more often than not.
There's a great quote here. I'm gonna again. There's bits and pieces I want to read from the start of chapter 7 of. This is from sorry. This is from Liberty or Equality: The Challenge of Our Time by Mr. Unpronounceable Dutch name, Mr. von Ritter. There's a great part at the beginning of chapter 7 here, where there's a quote here by G. Bernardos. He was talking to Roosevelt, actually. He says, "I am tired, Mr. Roosevelt, of hearing it said, even by Mr. Not Mr. Martin, Maritain, that the democracies are the opposite of dictatorships. Democracy offers no defense to dictators. That is the truth. Every democracy can at any moment have an acute attack of dictatorship, as one has an acute attack of appendicitis, and national temperament can do nothing about it."
It's a nicely put. Yes, it's very. I was saying this to you earlier, and I defy anybody to prove me wrong on this one. In that, certainly America's democratic system that they have there, with its Congress and Senate and dear leader in charge of everything as a president, is only a few inches away from the Roman format of dictatorship, which was a 10-year sentence or a 10-year sort of tenure, if you will, a 10-year tenure. That's a terrible phrase, or great, depending on who you are. But essentially, with the ability to do, mandates from the office, executive decrees or whatever they're called, you have in America, by anything other than in name, A dictatorship, but for 4 years. If it were for 10 years, it would be the dictatorship that Julius Caesar had in mind of taking. It would be exactly that. So yes, a democratic system can be used to put into power a dictatorship, and whether or not that dictator wants to use that system to remain in power and hand over power every period, or whether he wants to overthrow it and say, no, I'm in now, you're done, is up to the dictator. But I think you're only one executive order away from Joe Biden going, no, we're not going to have a general election in the future, and I'm putting the army on every street corner to make sure that if anyone thinks any different to that, they'll sort that out.
That's kind of happened in Washington. That's Mr. Bananas, by the way. I can't really speak. But yeah, what Mr. Bananas is really saying is once a state has a monopoly on justice and has the monopoly on violence, that at any moment it can become totalitarian. Because
Mr. Bananas.
It can become a totalitarian. Yeah, Mr. Bananas, yes. You have the banana.
I want the bananas.
You know yes, I'm just going to read this entire section in its entirety.
Go for it.
Because it is wonderful. This is the start of chapter 7. At this stage of our book, we need not deem it necessary to repeat our main thesis. The reader has consistently been warned not to confuse the democratic with the liberal principle, and he has been asked to remember that continental documentary democracy has a far stronger tendency to dispense with the liberal values than the democracy in the Anglo-Saxon world. Renan has cautioned us that the activists in the democratic camp who now create disturbances in particularly all European states do not in any way whatever have an American republic as their ideal. It is precisely this illiberalism which disappoints and frightens the English-speaking observer, because he frequently forgets that his enthusiasm belongs to two ideas that are not interconnected. One can be a liberal or a libertarian without being a Democrat, and one can also be a Democrat without being liberal or libertarian. Nor, we must add, is a parliament of its very nature a liberal or liberty-preserving institution, and that anti-liberal implications of egalitarianism are too obvious to need further elucidation, which I think is a great statement, because they are. I mean, if you're an egalitarian, just think about the logical implications of what you believe. The modern totalitarian parties are all fundamentally democratic. They have all insisted on their right to use the democratic label, and each has been vocal in representing its political leader as the personification of everybody, of the common man, of the entire nation. Among the Nazis, the notion that the leader of the single party was not the organ of the state, but the personification of community, was put forward by the most advanced National Social theorists. I don't think I need to say much more than that. That is an extremely precise description of everything we've been talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
That democracy is not essentially liberal. I mean, reading this actually has caused me to start writing an essay, which I will hopefully be presenting at a gathering or conference that is being held. The essay will at least appear in a published group of essays. Hopefully sometime in late August. You'll hear more about that as it happens. But the idea that liberal is not democracy and that liberal democracy is this weird compound is an entire series in of itself, but we have part of that within this, in that democracy isn't freedom. Democracy is simply, reduced to voting in many cases, and a high-minded set of ideals that are not really very implementable in practice, and again, lead to the ideas that lead to total states.
I suspect you are more likely to have a totalitarian dictatorship that is libertarian than you are to have a democratic libertarian state, or one that can maintain it for any length of time. You could, for a libertarian to exist, or a libertarian state to exist, it almost can't be democratic. Because the moment you've got enough people that want Gibbs or are easily swayed by people that in a democratic system, your libertarian system or your liberty system will start to be eroded. You almost need a monarch or a dictator to enforce freedom on people.
Yes.
It's,
It's a funny one, though. And again,
it's wild.
It's something. It is wild. It's something that Hopper goes into in great detail. That an aristocracy, in many ways, is better at preserving individual freedom than a democratic state is.
Yes.
At least in practice.
It-
There's a great point here. There's a great point. I think it's page 277 of the PDF, and I think it is page, if I can get it right here, 264 of the actual book. But basically, they pull a Sutton here, and they just pull out a bunch of receipts. If I can quickly rattle these up, because we do need to move on, unfortunately.
Where
277 at the bottom of the page. It's just really just quoting all the times that the Nazis have called themselves Democrats.
277 and the okay. Yeah.
There we go. It says, yet Hitler, who definitely has his eyes set on the multitudes, repeatedly called National Socialism democratic and styled himself as, in quotes, an arch-democrat. So did Goebbels and Rudolf Hess. The following are only a few instances. Hitler. Attack against Eton and Harrow, December 10th, 1940. He calls himself an arch-democrat. Munich, November 8th, 1938. Calls National Socialism the truest democracy. Berlin, January 30th, 1937, calls the National Socialist Constitution democratic. Berlin, May 21st, 1935. Also in Mein Kampf, says the truly Germanic democracy with the free election of the leader who is obliged to assume full responsibility for all his actions. Goebbels calls National Socialism an authoritarian democracy. Calls National Socialism Germanic democracy. Calls National Socialism the noblest form of European democracy. In 1934, admits the Nazis do not talk much about democracy, but insists they are nevertheless the executors of the general will. Rudolf Hess calls National Socialism the most modern democracy of the world, based on the confidence of the majority.
It is quite common to find the dictator and the totalitarian who has been voted in, shall we say, and it may be a single party state, but nonetheless, them claim democracy, isn't it? I don't even think they're joking. I think they actually believe it as well. I think they're probably right as well. On top of that.
The thing is, it doesn't actually matter whether they believe it or not. But yes, we have just had quite a large donation there.
I think that needs. I didn't see what Skull wrote, but thank you, Skull. What did he say?
Skullhammer donated $50. Thank you very much for that. Saying Pinky in the Brain, who is trying to take over the world this week in history. Minister of Public Enlightenment. Pinkerman explains it all. Thank you for the Pinky in the Brain joke. I missed that show. That show was good.
It was a favorite of mine for a long time. Incidentally, the brain is definitely the one that's insane.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, love that show. Love that show. That's some old school.
Well, we're going to have to get onto some of the stuff with the Soviets now, because we haven't even touched the Soviets yet.
That's a fair point. That is a fair point.
We might have to skim some of this stuff, because we're coming up on the 2-hour mark, and we are a bit more than halfway through, but not much. So that is the way that the National Socialists describe themselves as a democracy, because, well, they did. They regarded themselves, at least outwardly, at least in the outgroup rhetoric, they regarded themselves as such. Oh, that's a great one. But no, I've entitled this section the Soviet Interventionist Petri Dish, because it's really a follow-on from what we saw last week, and the week before, really, when we talked about Anthony Sutton. I think we talked about it in every stream really since the First World War. But Anthony Sutton and Wall Street and the Bolsheviks brings up, the very valid notion that the totalitarian state that forms in Soviet Russia is really a experimentation device of a lot of the Western institutions, especially of the Federal Reserve and of Wall Street. This is really their experiment.
Yes.
And you mentioned Anthony Sutton and his videos, but there's a great one here. I don't know if you quickly want to get it up. We can't really play it much on stream. I don't really want to, spoil it here, but this will be in the notes. But there's a great lecture here where he talks about the fact that the first 5-year plan in Soviet Russia, all the factories were built by American, British, and French, and also Japanese companies, Caterpillar, Ford, etc. And that the Soviet economy as it formed in the Soviet state was essentially built in its first iteration by the Western powers.
Oh, yeah.
By the Western allies. It's amazing to see that. But
did we have a timestamp? Did we have a timestamp for that? Because hold on a second.
I don't think it's only a 15-minute video. I'd recommend people just watch the whole thing.
I strongly recommend. It's on a nice channel as well, which is the Romanov Royal Martyrs, which I strongly concur with that sentiment. The Romanov family were martyred at the altar of socialist democracy. And,
yes, they were.
And I hate to say it, I think they're coming for the Windsors too.
Possibly. The problem that we have as well is that the Tsar and his family were relations of the other European.
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely.
It really is an attack by the quote unquote democratic elites on the old autocrats, like literally an attack on them, and that they go ahead and facilitate the murder of the relatives of the supposed heads of state of their own countries. It's almost absurd, and you'd have to view all the evidence that Sutton has gathered to actually believe it, because in the version of history that you have been told, it doesn't make any sense. But you have to start seeing, especially stuff like the Federal Reserve, as one of the most aggressive implementers of the total state. It becomes the evangelist of it in this case, very much so.
I've actually put a link to that video in chat for those that want to queue it up to watch afterwards. As you say, it's only a 15-minute video, but this is Anthony Sutton, in his own words, talking about Wall Street, the Bolshevik Revolution. It is very eye-opening, and he's in there going, literally, I've checked the receipts. Well,
what functionally, and as we talked about previously, bringing it back up, the Wall Street saw a weak Russia as an opportunity. They were worried about Tsarist Russia becoming a financial hub to rival New York. And what you got with the Soviet Union was endless workers' councils, endless competing interests, and endless, really, democratic trappings. There's a lot, again, we don't have time to go through a lot of them, there's a lot of academic work out there in the period which actually describes the Soviet Union as too democratic. And that was seen as one of its shortfalls. It was seen as a state that had too much input from too many people, and then you ended up with what we'll talk about a second, which is democratic centralism, and then Stalinism coming in and having to stamp all that out essentially. But the weakened state of the Soviet Union and its exploitation by the central bank led interests of the Western nations is something very deliberate, and it's something that is very, very important when we talk about, one, how the Russian total state came about, and two, the trappings of democracy within it. Because they were only able to sell a lot of their intervention in Russia by selling it as a democracy and selling it as the purest form of, the will of the people. And that is what they did during this period. They all extolled the virtues of Soviet Russia. And they did so because they wanted to use it basically as a testing ground.
Oh yeah, and it's wild. It's wild listening to you hear a lot of your nutcase commies on Twitter and various other people extolling the virtues of communism. Brought Russia forwards in a great leap forwards, almost. Not quite use that term. That's usually China they use that, but of sort of technology, which is utter nonsense. I mean, the Tsarist Russia had a huge amount of technology. The revolution destroyed a lot of the technology, and almost every single factory that was built that the communists sort of quote and talk about, every single one of those factories was built by Ford, Caterpillar, and God knows who else, and in the first 5-year plan. And when Stalin tried to do a second 5-year plan afterwards, it was a complete fiasco, and they needed to bring people back in to sort the mess out, because guess what? They'd gotten rid of all of the people in Russia that knew how to run a factory. They'd basically copied the factories that they'd built under the American companies and the Japanese companies and the German companies, French companies and English companies that had all charged in there. And then they tried to do it for themselves, and they still didn't have the actual manpower because they'd killed them all in the revolution. And anyone that stuck their head up in the Stalinist Russia, guess what? They were usually off to a gulag fairly promptly afterwards anyway, because they were proving themselves to be not equal to their fellow man. Yes. Anyway, sorry, I can rant very quickly about these.
It's a good rant, and it's true. But one final point I want to make before you move on, because I want to kind of skim past this one, to be honest, because we have talked a lot about it before. It's important, is that why, when we get into World War II, because a lot of history as taught completely misses out the interwar years, because as I've talked about on the previous version of this stream, and on other streams as well, the interwar years don't make any fucking sense. They don't. They do not make any sense in history as taught. You get a bit about the Roaring Twenties, you get a bit about the Wall Street crash, and a bit about the New Deal, but the stuff in Russia, the stuff in Germany, apart from the hyperinflation, a lot of the time period is swept away because it doesn't make any sense that Hitler would be the enemy of the quote-unquote free democracies, but Stalin would be an ally.
Yeah.
If you are looking at this as an alien from an outside perspective, if you're one of those blue beam projections, and you're looking, you're looking at world history and going, if these guys are so obsessed with freedom, why were they allied with that Stalin guy? That doesn't make any fucking sense.
If they got into the Second World War to protect Poland, why did they ally themselves with that other guy that invaded Poland at exactly the same time as the other guy with the moustache invaded Poland? Yes, some people would wonder on that front, wouldn't they?
And what you have to realize is that the Soviet Union was an American, British, and French project.
Sadly.
Yes. But the Soviet Union, even under Stalin, there's a lot of people who think that Stalin was brought in because Lenin didn't want to play ball anymore. And Stalin would, to an extent, play ball. It's not a proven point in history, but the reality is that when Stalin took power, he was, a lot more willing, at least militarily, to play ball with people like Britain and America. In the same way that Saddam Hussein was when we talked about the Forever Wars. Coming into World War II, Stalin was seen as, again, our guy, because Hitler had essentially betrayed the international financiers after taking all their money.
Wait, Hitler betrayed the people with small hats?
Turns out he did.
Wow, who would have guessed? Yeah, and you know what? So did Soviet Russia, but
the history only makes sense. It only makes sense if you see Soviet Russia as an extension of the power of the Western financial interests. And that is the through line I want to put in people's heads with this. But again, we need to move on to the next point, I think.
Yes. Hold on, where are we? I got carried away, and are we
Democratic centralism.
Democratic centralism, there we are, yeah.
Which is, again, I want to talk about the actual function of Soviet democracy. Because there was a lot of Soviet democracy to go around, or at least the appearance of it, the illusion of it. In fact, at a local level, democracy was extremely flaunted and important. You got a lot of these troikas and, controlled workers' councils, and, you get people who are appointed to committees to, plan the bus routes, or, do little bits of miners' co-ops or things like that. But when you look at something like democratic centralism, you see the purity that has to be there, and you see the authoritarian, kind of nature of the Communist Party, but seen through a democratic lens. It's ridiculous, and you can laugh at them calling themselves a democracy if you want. But Lenin basically came in and said, look, if we're going to have a totalitarian state, as we have to implement, the tenets of Marxism, we can't be a democracy, at least not on the top level. And we can wrap it in democratic terms, but democratic centralism is purported to combine two opposing forms of party leadership: democracy, which allows for the free and open discussion, and central control, which ensures the party unity and discipline. At the 10th Congress of All Russian Communist Party in 1921, the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin declared that the party was not a debating society in which all opinions were tolerated and freely expressed. It was a vanguard party whose role as the leader of the revolution demanded extreme discipline at a high level of organization. Unrestrained discussion, he insisted, would produce inter-party disagreements and factions and prevent the party from acting effectively. On the other hand, absolute control by centralized leadership would discourage new ideas from the lower party memberships. Therefore, Lenin argued free discussion of the party should be tolerated and even encouraged up to a point. But once a vote was taken, all discussion had to end. It's amazing how you see, democratic centralism is a great way of describing how the left operates, because they see themselves as that. They are very effective at a high level of saying, these are our ideas, these are our principles, they are not up for debate. Lenin really is one of the only effective people in terms of leftist tactics and policies. You have to study Lenin, as a lot of us have been talking about, in more, let's say, effective libertarian circles, overcorrection enthusiasts. Because Lenin, despite being a communist, was effective. Lenin won, and he did so through, being a vanguard party. And he managed to, project his will on the Soviet public and managed to win the support of many of the Western companies by doing this, by being someone who was willing to tolerate the trappings of democracy up to a point, but then go and say, my will is law once we've voted on it.
See, I would agree, Lenin, but there's the other one as well. The third, out of Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, Trotsky's the one that always bothered me the most, because whilst Lenin won short term and gained control, and then Stalin won after that, and then, chased Trotsky across the world and killed him. Trotsky's ideas, because Trotsky he wasn't a communist. Trotsky believed in the forever wars more than anybody else that has ever existed, just about, and he wanted the whole world in flames until the whole world had a one world government. And it's, your neocons and your neolibs are singing Trotskyite, war tunes these days. Always have been. It's whilst Lenin is one. Yes, Lenin was very, very effective at the time. Trotsky was dangerous. So dangerous that Stalin had him bumped off, even in across the world in South America. And even now, Trotsky is still, as I said, really dangerous.
He did get that ice pick that made his ears burn, yes.
Yeah, but he's... you neocons, rhinos, and certainly the Democratic Party in America, and a lot of people... Corbyn was a Trotskyite. There's a lot of them that are trots, even to this day, and the guy was a monster. The guy wanted to see the world burn, and there's still people singing his tune.
Well, they synthesized that. They looked to Trotsky, they looked to Lenin, and they looked to this idea of complete ideological purity on a top level, but letting people debate meaningless minutiae, like, let's say, as we see the LGBT issues on a bottom level. It's a great way of distracting people. So it's like planning bus routes while people starve. It's that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Lenin as well, and leftists in general, recognize the power of forcing people to have, open to all ideas and forcing people to become a debating society. They saw its corrosive effect on their own governments and their own organizations and their own movements and said, let's go and do that. That's what critical theory is, That's what a lot of the cultural Marxism stuff is. It is reducing people to constant debates and meaningless discussions, and meanwhile you seize power. That is the express purpose of that. And it's interesting to see that it's still, despite being an authoritarian regime openly, and despite being, a total state, they still call it democratic centralism. They still say that they are a democracy, and their power is derived from voting and the will of the people. And you can laugh at it all you want, but that's how they advertise and describe themselves. It's quite funny. Well, I've got a link here actually. During my researching of this, I actually looked at one of the talk pages about Soviet democracy, and they actually go on to make some relatively interesting points about all this literature which talks about, the Soviet Union's democracy. But ultimately, what they're doing is they're engaging in apologencia, not based on the actions of the Soviet Union, but whether or not those actions were quote unquote democratic. It's exactly like the quote we had from Liberty and Democracy there, that democracy isn't a synonym for liberty. Democracy is simply a process. And once you get into justifying an action by it being democratic, you end up removing any other moral implications of it. It's like, well, this was a democratic action, so it must be better than an undemocratic action. And it's really funny to see them using that. It's a whitewashing. It revolves around whether or not they were democratic, and nothing functionally changes. Shooting somebody is the same as shooting somebody after 5 people have voted on it. It doesn't change the action itself. But in their discussion of Soviet democracy and whether the Soviet Union was a democracy or not, they attempt to justify the undeniable evil actions of the Soviet Union by saying that these actions were in some way democratic. It's a great way of showing, like, almost like the mind virus of democracy, that as soon as something becomes democratic or a democracy, it instantly becomes better, no matter what materially changes.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm playing in my head. Did you watch The Death of Stalin? A bunch of us watched
Yes,
it.
I did.
That's a very, very good, very funny film. But the idea, as you say, that if your dear leader, and if the dear leader's decided it, that's it. It's for the good of the state. And there were people sort of apologizing to Stalin for having to waste a bullet on them whilst they were being put against the wall, kind of thing. And it was always for the good of the state. It's amazing how that mind virus works. It's amazing how many people went to their deaths believing it was for the good of the state. Believing that it was
people, yes,
for the good of the people. I must have done something terribly wrong to have upset our dear leader, for him to put me against the wall and shoot me in the head. Whereas in fact it was, your wife's a bit good looking, mate, and we want her free to help other people, or whatever.
No, it could be as simple as someone gave someone the wrong look, or signed the report wrong, or there's a lot of mistaken identity even. It's just it became a case of, in the Stalinist purges, that once you have something like democratic centralism, and once you have the self-perpetuating total state, you need to do more and more extreme things to keep it going, because it naturally tends towards collapse. The world naturally tends towards free association and free exchange. You have to put effort in to stop that happening. And as we say, as we'll see later on in the time period with the Stalinist purges, and as we're kind of glossing over them because they are a very well trodden point of history. There's very few people out there who would try and justify what Stalin did. But what we're trying to say is that even someone like Stalin, again, there's a couple more quotes we'll get to, was whitewashed as a Democrat and as someone who was working out the world. Again, I'm going a bit ahead because we've got the whole Uncle Joe section here.
Uncle Joe.
Before I talk past it, there's a great article here they've actually used before, by Ralph Raico. It's actually a section from where is it? Sorry, from Great Wars and Great Leaders, a book I'm currently trying to read and hope to use more of in the next couple of episodes. It's a great book. I would recommend tracking it down and finding it. And Ralph Raico is a very good author, but he talks about the socialist dream of democracy, and that again they see themselves as democratic. It's quite, and like I said, we have used this one before, so I'm not gonna read it in too much detail. But it's quite funny when he quotes here a book as well that I'm trying to track down called "The Origins of Totalitarian Democracy," by I think it's J.L. Tellman, and he goes into in great detail about the fact that in fact, he describes them as Hegelians at one point, I think, as well. Yeah,
Hmm.
he talks about the Hegelian roots of the philosophy and the Hegelian new man and all of this. And now, again, I would advise you to go and read this because we're again running a little bit long on time with some of this. There's quite a long discussion I want to go into at the end of this. But what you end up with is the Marxist dream is predicated on what they consider the purest form of democracy. Sorry, I'm just speed talking here, Trig.
Yes.
What's your take on Soviet democracy? Because I've just talked through like 10 minutes there. I've just realized
Soviet democracy is, I mean, it is it was a democratic format. The idea of having a democracy with only one party seems somewhat of an anathema to democracy as most people would see it, although anyone that's familiar with various other democratic states around the world, such as North Korea and China, it is not that uncommon to find that a single party considers itself to be a single party state considers itself to be a democracy, because it is the voice of the people. They consider that party to be a party of the people, by the people, for the people, even though the people are retarded. And by extension, it is a party of retarded people, for retarded people of retarded people.
that's the quote.
That's the quote. But it's almost a shame, but that isn't actually the case, because it's usually despotic and sort of power-hungry nihilists in charge more often than not, and they're there for the power. They're there for their own self-aggrandizement. But it's very much a democratic state, and they get, if they're put in by a revolution of the people, and the people demand a this state, is that not? I mean, okay, they're voted with lead and copper and brass rather than with paper and pen, but the people have definitely spoken, and is that not what a democracy is after all? And certainly that's what happened with Soviet Russia. That's certainly what happened with communist China. And in some respects, they got what they deserved. They put into power a absolutely horrendous nightmare state. And but it's communism, and certainly Soviet communism isn't what we would consider a democracy. But in terms of what it accomplishes very, very fast what a Western democracy seems to have accomplished, or it seems to be in the process of accomplishing a lot slower.
Yes.
The consolidation of power takes a little longer under actual democracy, but nonetheless, the total control, it happens eventually. It just takes a little longer. The interesting thing is, you can almost have a Soviet Russia, a Russian Revolution, Soviet Russia, a Stalinist Russia, a Russia under the various other people, then the collapse of the Soviet Union, and a now Russia that you have under Putin, all within the time it's taken for a democratic system to be halfway to what I mean, you get there slower, but you get there in the end. It's almost, dare I say, and I don't wish we'd had a Soviet Russia takeover and then come out at the other side. But I don't know. I'm beginning to think that they at least know damn well that they don't want that back.
Yes, that's true. The Eastern Europeans do know that.
Yeah, the Eastern Europeans are reeing about what Europe is doing quite often. Very, very regularly it's said that, someone's there going, oh God, we joined the EU, and we're seeing the same rhetoric that we just got out of from behind the Iron Curtain. What's going off? Can we rethink this decision?
Well, there's an interesting point to be made here that the single-party state internally justifies itself by saying that they are the purest will of the people, and that they have essentially reached the end of history and brought about the perfect system. If you have a perfect system with a perfect democratic party, why would you need multiple, political parties? That would just set you back. the argument they have made is that they have reached the end point of the progression, and that they are, the Hegelian ideal of the iterated perfect society. The difference between them and what the supposed Western democracies say is by degree. It is that the Western democracies sign up to the same incrementalism. They sign up to the same Hegelian dream of the perfect society. But what the quote unquote free societies will say is that, well, we are working towards that. We are iterating towards the final end goal of the utopia of the perfect society, and it is. But if you look at that, you must realize that the end point is a totalitarian state. That they are incrementally building themselves towards that. And if you truly believe in a in a deterministic sense in the march of history, that you also believe in the march of history towards the total state, towards the complete elimination of human freedom to maximize, somehow human happiness. If you are someone who believes that, you do this through a government, and you do this through, quote unquote, the will of the people as exercised by a government, all you're saying is, again, as we've talked about multiple times throughout this series, you just want Soviet Russia, but the process takes 100 years.
Yeah, it's you could almost be through it and out the other side of it in the time that it's taken us to get to the point where we're starting to realise that that's the route we're heading down. Certainly, it's slower via democracy, but that's the only thing I would admit. So I don't think it is in any way, other shape or form different in any other way. Sure, that means that my grandparents and my parents have managed to get through it without going, oh dear God, it's Soviet Russia. But it does mean that I have, and my future generation get to go, oh shit, we're in Soviet Russia from 100 years ago. How did this happen? Whereas Soviet Russia are like, lol, we're no longer Soviet Russia. We're a Russian Federation and we're actually free now. Or freer. I don't know whether they're free. I'm not going to glorify Putin's Russia, but I will say he seems to piss off the right people quite a lot.
As I've said throughout this series, a lot of people view history as things getting better. But as I always say, things are not better, they are merely different. And you have no way of knowing whether the people are happier. You have no way of measuring the inside of their minds. You have no way of knowing if they would be able to even compare how they were previously, with the knowledge of how they are now. You can't swap the time periods. People don't have that knowledge, and nostalgia can be misplaced. But, all you can really say is that things are different. But I think you can make a judgment of how free are people? How free are people to pursue what they want? How free is the exchange? And, how overbearing is the society around them? You can take at least snapshots of that. And as we can see, the last 100 years has been a incremental process of less freedoms. In many respects, as we would define them. Like I said, we cannot make a judgment of whether or not modern society, or the society that people found themselves in 1930s compared to 1900, was quote-unquote better. All we can say is it was different. We can describe the differences, and we can ask people, within your own value structure, do you think this is an improvement or not? I think that's one of the pieces of mathematics people attempt to do that they can't do, is a value judgment on the state of a society. Because to judge the state of a society, like I said, you must measure the actual value structure and happiness level of each individual within it, and that's impossible.
What I would say is, if you took Tim the Immortal, and Tim the Immortal is by definition someone who doesn't age, doesn't get older, in fact, and Tim at 30 years of age in 1900 got to take home almost everything that he earned. And Tim these days gets to take home just over half of what he's earned and is giving it to the state. So Tim has lost a significant amount of buying power. Also, Tim in the the 1980s could buy a house that was an average priced house would be twice the price or twice the amount he would earn in a year, whereas now it's probably about 11 times the amount of what he would earn in a year being average. He's seen his average earnings and average wealth significantly diminished. He's much more highly taxed. He's seen a significant amount of laws be put in place, so obviously he is less free. By the very definition of those laws being put in place, he has fewer things that he is allowed to do. So he has seen, over the last 120 years, a lot less freedom happen and be inflicted upon him, and he has seen an awful lot less of his the fruits of his labor go into his pocket and more of it go to the state. And if this curve is to be recognized and continues the way it has done, in another 100 years' time, are we going to see Tim putting 100% of his earnings into the state? And at which point, if everything you earn goes to some other organization and you are left with nothing, is that organization providing you with a house? Is it providing you with a place to sleep and food? And if so, how is that different from slavery? Are we just on a long route towards state-enforced slavery? Because I think we are. I really think that's where we're going, and that's roughly what Russia did.
It is.
In very, very rapid format, and that's where we're heading now.
And the justification is always the greater good.
Yeah, for the same. They did it, we said it, yeah.
And we're talking about wider subjects here. We'll talk about more of this towards the end, because there's a big discussion I want to have around some of the material that we've got here. But we do kind of need to move on to another aspect of quote-unquote Soviet democracy and a lot of the carrying of water for the Soviet system by the quote-unquote liberal democracies, which is the complete, lies told about Stalin during the time period.
Oh,
because Russia was our ally and had to maintain as our ally. And so domestic audiences, the voting public, who is supposedly imbued with these magical powers to know everything, can't actually know what the state's up to, and they can't actually know who they're allying with. There's a great one there. Again, World War II is a great time period for all these incongruous images, as we saw in the thumbnail, of comrades in arms. It's Winston Churchill and
comrades in arms. Time had him as Man of the Year. Shortly after that, Hitler was Man of the Year. Or was it before? I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. Time can pick some Men of the Year. Let's put it that way. Damn.
The incident I want to talk about specifically is the New York Times and one of its leading journalists. It's a what's his name? Sorry, Walter Duranty is one of the most famous journalists from the 1930s. Like I said, he won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on Stalin, and the New York Times now acknowledges that it was all lies and that he was covering up Stalin's atrocities for a Western audience. And he was doing so because he was a true believer in the Soviet cause, even seeing all of that. Even seeing all of what Stalin was doing, he was a true believer in the Soviet cause. Yeah, here's the. I think that's is that the first link or the second link? I think that's the first link, because I've got an archive link as well of an editorial they did, basically debunking their own reporting. But yeah, this is a statement put out by NYT Co. For a statement about the 1932 Pulitzer Prize. Do you want to read this one, Trig?
Yep, can do. Duranty, one of the most famous correspondents of his day, won the prize for 13 articles written in 1931 analysing the Soviet Union under Stalin. Times correspondents and others have since largely discredited his coverage. Now, here we go. Duranty's cable dispatches had to pass Soviet censorship, and Stalin's propaganda machine was powerful and omnipresent. Duranty's analysis relied on the official sources as his primary source of information, accounting for the most significant flaw in his coverage. His consistent underestimation of Stalin's brutality, describing the communist plan to liquidate the 5 million kulaks, relatively well-off farmers supposed to be the Soviet Union collectivization of agriculture. Duranty wrote in 1931, for example, must all of them and their families be physically abolished? Of course not. They must be liquidated or melted into the hot fire of exile and labour, into the proletarian mass. That's not actually what happened, though, is it?
No.
Taking Soviet propaganda at face value, this way was completely misleading, as talking with ordinary Russians might have revealed even at the time. Duranty's prize-winning articles quoted not a single one, only Stalin, who forced farmers all over the Soviet Union into collective farms and sent those who resisted to concentration camps. Collectivization was the main cause of a famine that killed millions of people in the Ukraine. The Holodomor, the Soviet breadbasket in 1932 and 1933, 2 years after Duranty won his prize.
It just basically goes on to talk about this and the fact that he was a lying bastard.
Yeah.
It tries to cover that up. There's another editorial as well called the Editorial Notebook, Trenchcoats Then and Now. And it basically goes on to say the lavishness Duranty was poured on by Stalin and the Soviet regime to make him part of their propaganda machine. It starts out as saying, on Christmas Day, 1933, Joseph Stalin conferred his orchid on his favorite Western journalists. He said, "You have done a good job in your reporting the USSR. Though you are not a Marxist because you try to tell the truth about our country, I might say you bet on our horse to win when others had no chance, and I'm sure you have not lost by it." That reporter was Walter Duranty, the New York Times Moscow correspondent who is credited with coining the term Stalinism. He was fascinated, almost mesmerized by the harsh system he described, and having bet on Stalin's rise in 1920, Mr. Duranty remained loyally partial to his horse. The result was some of the worst reporting to appear in this newspaper. We got a Nobel Prize for this shit. But the thing is, it fit. It fit with the zeitgeist of the age that was trying to maintain the public support for an alliance with Joseph Stalin. If they had publicized the brutal dictator that he was, they might have thrown up some opposition for their allying with him in World War II. That's what they wanted. They wanted the Soviet war machine, and they were willing to ignore the deaths of millions to maintain their access to it, to maintain their access to their Soviet project, and to, essentially their guy. He was described as Stalin's apologist. He was somebody who did really believe, at least partially, in the Soviet system. It's amazing that they feign ignorance, but anyone at the time, there were at least murmurings of this, and to acknowledge that he was verbatim quoting Soviet propaganda, and the editors of the New York Times at the time saw no problem with that, is an admission that they really just wanted to print Soviet propaganda. That it's seen as a monumental failure of journalists at the time, but it's a monumental failure of the political environment and pressures of the time too.
Yes, but when you take into account the political pressures in with the economic pressures and the people that may or may not have owned these newspapers, or certainly that read them on Wall Street, and who they might have been heavily invested with, it's not that surprising once you've done the reading. Let's put it that way. That they might be somewhat eager to portray Stalin and what was going off there in as bright a light as possible, or as most pleasant a light as possible, rather. Yeah. Who knew? It's the financiers and the media moguls would sing the same tune.
It is quite astounding, but unfortunately not unexpected.
No, certainly not these days. Anyway. Yeah, no, it's very worrisome though. It really is, that because this is happening now, as I just hinted. You have your Great Reset lots. You've got what you were talking about with Evelyn the other day with regards to the housing market, and you're now seeing huge numbers of real estate companies backed by loan and hedge funds buying huge amounts of property, which is forcing the property market skyward and putting an awful lot of people on the renting ladder. which is Great Reset tier stuff, and it's again spun in a very positive light by the press, economics and mass media in singing the same tune. Anyway, grumble, something about free world, etc. In fact, speaking of liberty, wasn't there liberty and equality? Here we go. Once it is no longer useful, public opinion is openly done away with, but the leaders still rely on democratic trappings.
There is
Yes.
I think it's from a slightly earlier point than that. So I've had to come back on my phone because Windows has decided to throw a slight wobbler. I'll be back on my proper mic in a second. It's decided to freeze everything. So I'm doing a very quick restart. It's fine, guys. This is why we have, kind of redundancies with you pushing out the stream and stuff.
Yes.
Hopefully I sound okay, but
it's not terrible. It's not terrible. It's a bit you're on your phone, but
apologies for that, guys.
We will live.
We will muddle through. Yes. I just getting the document back up. I don't know if you want to read this one or not.
I can take this one. Yeah. Where was it? The causes of this modern inability to make a peaceful transformation. Provost Paradol even foresaw a period of anarchy before the final establishment of tyranny, are manifold, and we will have to seek them in the popularity of democratic and pseudo-democratic trappings, so significant for the totalitarian dictatorships. In fact, let me just transition this so people can read along. We have to seek them in the general weakening of the familiaristic principle, and, last but not least, in the continued existence of the legitimate royal and imperial families in exile, which acts as a powerful psychological obstacle. A coronation of either Hitler or Mussolini would have covered these dictators with ridicule, and their popularity would have been obliterated immediately. In the USSR, where the last vestiges of public opinion had been eliminated, the situation is, theoretically at least, different, yet the perpetuation of personal tyranny in the democratic guise involves singularity, struggles amongst the eligible, successes, purges, assassinations, conspiracies, trials. The royalization of the leaders certainly lacks today its psychological tropes.
Basically, what he's saying is that, even though they may rule like it, Hitler and Stalin are not kings.
No.
And if they were to declare themselves kings, they would look ridiculous. They would be laughed at, and quite rightly so. But
yes.
The problem that they have, is that all of this power comes about through not divine right, but the will of, the quote-unquote will of the people. And that even when democracy is done away with, like in the USSR, even when democracy is seen as something that's just an obstacle to, the quote-unquote will of the people being exercised, what you still get is someone who, if they were to crown themselves a king, would still look ridiculous. Because they are not a king. They are supposed to be the embodiment of the democratic will of the people, which I think is again, it's quite dense language there, but it's a very valid point to be made that these people are not ruling like aristocracy. No. And they are doing that by design. In fact, they are, in many cases, more powerful than aristocracy because of how they are ruling. Well, they are doing this through a mental trick, like David Hume talks about. They are doing this through the idea of the permission of the rule rather than the right of the ruler.
Well, this is it. The right of the ruler, the aristocracy, the monarch, if you will, is ordained by God. And
yes,
for right or wrong, for good or bad, see however you want to will it or see it, the idea of ordained by deity as a reason to rule is somewhat laughed at these days. We are post religion. We're all clever, atheists these days, don't you know? And whilst I would agree, I am also an atheist. I actually think that politics should be regarded as a semi-religious sort of thing, and I think that an awful lot of atheists need to go and read a lot of religion and understand what we are in danger of losing by disregarding religion. Because whilst, yes, ordained by God does seem somewhat silly, there's something to the idea that I own this land, I as king own this land, and I will pass this land and everything in it on to my future generations. The people that live on this land are my subjects, and I must have their best will at heart, because I am here to not just rule the land, but to look after everything in it. And if they aren't coming out of it better off than they were, before me, then they're going to lynch me.
Yes.
They're going to take that ordained by God title away from me very, very quickly, and give me a very rapid way of meeting my ordainer, shall we say? And that did happen quite a lot more often in history than is often talked about. Plus,
I think the point they're trying.
Sorry, go on.
I think the point they're trying to raise there is that all totalitarian modern states at some point had to be democratic.
Yes.
The takeover, whether revolutionary or, in terms of the ballot box, it was either a popular uprising or a popular vote. And there is no other way that these neo kind of fiefdom, these neo total states come into being, in that they rule and exercise power in a very specific way, and it's different than the aristocracy before them. And there's again, it's the point that Hopper gets at quite often, but it's a point you need to keep in mind, that these people are not kings. They do not act like kings. They do not act like kings by design.
No. They act almost in the opposite way to kings as well. They don't have the state's best interest in heart. They don't have the subject's best interest at heart. They come in as an intermediate janitor for a short period of time, and they try to basically make their mark on the state and make sure that they come out of it very nice. Thank you very much. See you later. Oh, and lol. By the way, I did that by raising taxes. Screw you guys. You're all poorer now. And that sums up every single prime minister, president, etc. In the last 100 years, everyone has always been poorer for their existence. By the end of it, just about, they've all come in, added new legislation, added new taxation, new budgets. Very few people have come out of a democratic cycle better off. Or very few, the people in general, shall we say, have come out better off than they went in. Because, we can see we're all poorer now, significantly, than we were 100 years ago.
Well, that kind of brings us on to one of our last points, I think, which is a lot of the stuff about wrangling about totalitarianism is really just saying that my total state is better than your total state. It's, my dictator could beat up your dictator. It's really what they're saying. It took me ages to find this image, but there's this great parade they did after World War II, which has this almost Maoist style massive head of FDR, like this massive bust, like he is, he's indulging, or at least the state is indulging him. I think he's dead at this point, in the same trappings of a Stalin, of a Hitler, in that he is almost deified as the literal figurehead of the state. He is the embodiment of the will of the people, and he's being lionized after this outpouring of victory.
Damn,
as this, yeah, it is.
That's a lot of head he got there.
He's being lionized here in the same way that a Hitler or Stalin would be, in the same almost ridiculous scale.
Yeah.
It's silly, but it brings home just how much of a virtual dictator FDR was. And again, this is the first part, really, of setting up a lot of the stuff we'll talk about when we talk about the actual time period, because we do focus on this stream with Britain and America. But the issue here is that, you are just wrangling. You're wrangling about which oppressive system is better and which is more democratic. It's this bun fight of, my iron fist represents the people better than your iron fist does. And I think we've got some pretty good quotes lined up here. I'm afraid you'll probably have to read them, Trig, since I'm stuck on my phone.
Okay.
But there's
not a problem.
There's some very, very great stuff here. I'll probably be back in the actual, my good microphone momentarily.
Okay, this This is Socialism and Capitalism one, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
By Triple H himself, Mr. Hans Hermann Hoppe. Triple H. I don't know why I saw that. I think I saw that on Twitter the other day. I love it.
Yes, that was. Who was that? That was what's he called? Ludwig von Mises, I think. What that was.
Yes, yeah, it's the spectacular way of putting it. Yeah, Triple H. Here we go. Right. Regarding these property rules, one realizes at once that although socialism of social engineering allows for a gradual implementation of its goals with only moderate degree of intervention, in the property rights of natural owners, since the degree to which their rights can be curtailed is to be determined by society, the social engineers. Private ownership is, in principle, abolished and people's productive enterprises take place under the threat of an ever-increasing or even total expropriation of private owners. In these respects, there is no difference whatsoever between social democratic and conservative socialism and socialism's socially engineered version. The difference again is reduced to one of social psychology, while Marxist, redistributive, and conservative socialism all want to achieve a general goal determined in advance, a goal egalite, or of the preservation of a given order. The socialism of social engineering does not have any such design. Its idea is one of punctuated, unprincipled interventionism, flexible, piecemeal engineering. The engineering socialist is thus seemingly much more open to criticism, changing responses, new ideas, and this attitude certainly appeals to a lot of people who would not willingly subscribe to any other forms of socialism.
It is. Again, it's talking about incremental socialism there.
Yeah.
It's talking about socialism by degree.
Yes.
But again, it's Hopper saying a socialist is a socialist is a socialist.
Yes.
And he's right. It's the same system. It really is. And it's the same way of viewing the world. It's just one is a bit more amenable and one is a bit more extreme. But their end goals are still identical. They are inseparable. And, an incremental socialist still ends up in the same place as a, outward totalitarian socialist. They just do it slightly slower.
Yeah, it takes a little longer. It means that probably one generation of people suffers a significantly less than, but eventually you get to the point where people are going, oh no, it's yes. Horrendous again.
I should be slightly more high definition now, as my Windows has decided to start behaving itself again.
You are indeed back in.
Yes, I'm glad I was able to get through that. That was kind of annoying, but we do muddle through. It seems that the powers that be, in a cosmic sense, are trying to stop these streams, but we will not let them.
No, they will not shut us down. They can't. But yes, where were we?
The signal.
Yes, no, absolutely not. What was that from? That was Firefly, wasn't it?
Yes.
You can't stop the signal. Yeah, no, the Triple H, Hans Hermann Hoppe, it puts it very nicely there. I do like the way he writes. He's quite eloquent and he's not too wordy. Although, as you said earlier, some of the earlier stuff is very eloquent.
It is. Well, all of these are to varying degrees socialist states. Nazi Germany,
yes, under
Hitler, Soviet Russia under Stalin,
yes,
and America under FDR, as we'll be using as a point of comparison next time. The differences are mostly in their rhetoric and in their speed.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to point out also England fulfills this as well. FDR wasn't the only one.
No.
We were all ploughing down this route. The whole of the Western world, if you will, was ploughing down this route. Be it at one speed or another, it really is just a matter of which lane you're in, whether you're dawdling along slowly and enjoying the scenery, or whether you're ploughing straight head on into the nightmare totalitarian state that Soviet Russia and Germany was. They were
Well, there's
definitely getting
another.
there quicker, but
Yes, they were definitely getting there quicker. And I don't mention the UK just for expediency. They had the Unemployment Act by this point,
yes.
which was, again, when we talked about the period, was described by contemporary historians as socialism by the back door, because it was. There was mass increase in public spending on, on what eventually became the welfare state, but was essentially already set up as early as the 1920s.
Hmm.
It's quite extraordinary how far Britain went, even as compared to America. Even though America had the more powerful international financial instruments, domestically, Britain was already embracing the trappings of a welfare state and mass wealth redistribution. They were much more down that alleyway than America was by that point. So yeah, you are right to point that out. I don't mention Britain at this stage because one, we'll be talking about next time, and two, FDR is a bit better as a point of comparison because he is such a outwardly, borderline dictator in the
Yes.
period.
Yes.
He's a great mirror to someone like Hitler. There's another quote that I will be able to read this time, actually,
Go on.
from
Go on.
Liberty and Equality.
Have a bash.
When it talks about democracy, especially, I love the way this one is framed. I really, really like the lyrical language in all of this.
Yes.
Because and some of the concepts as well. Because what they do is they talk to something we don't really talk about anymore, which is more to do with peoples and cultures, and not just saying that they are a wrong thing, just acknowledging them as their existence. It's so refreshing to see that. Sorry, I'm going off a tangent and rambling here, but it's so refreshing to talk about, like, the Anglosphere mindset or the Anglo-Saxon mindset is not something we talk about much anymore. But it's something that gets discussed quite heavily in this book, and about, our ideas of ourselves and our ideas of ourselves as a people have been lost quite heavily. But anyway, I'll get on with the quote. The vast majority of Americans and Englishmen talking about, in quotes, democracy always include the liberal element in their concept of democracy. And this is in spite of the fact that democracy and liberalism are concerned with two entirely different problems. The former is concerned with the question of who should be vested with the ruling authority, while the latter deals with the freedom of the individual, regardless of who carries the government. A democracy can be highly illiberal. The Volstead Act, quite democratically voted for, interfered with the dinner menus of millions of citizens. That is the Prohibition Act, the Volstead Act. Fascism, national and international socialism repeatedly insisted that they were in essence democratic, a claim which must be viewed in a strict philosophical and historical setting, and in the view becomes less hypocritical when observers in the Western Hemisphere becomes less hypocritical than observed in the Western Hemisphere, I want to admit. The Soviets' use of the term democratic label is by no means a shrewd political maneuver of recent years, but a terminology already adopted by Lenin and continued by Stalin throughout the 1920s. If we accept St. Thomas's definition of democracy, we will find that the dictatorship of the proletariat, provided the proletariat is the majority, is more democratic than the American Constitution, in which, in contrast to the sacred books of communism, the word democracy never appears, never figures. So, on the other hand, we can imagine the absolute ruler, an autocratic emperor, for instance, who's thoroughly through and through a liberal. Although it is obvious that he cannot be democratic in the political sense. So they make the distinction that you make, that you can have an absolute monarch who will impose freedom on people. Yes. Or you can have a democracy that that instills the will of the people, that will be a horrifying totalitarian state. It very, very succinctly passes that, which the more I read Liberty and Equality, the more I think it is an essential tome if you have any kind of skepticism about the cathedral of democracy.
I think, to be honest, I really do think at this point you are more likely to get a libertarian dictator, in inverted commas, or libertarian monarch, than you would ever get a libertarian democracy, and certainly one that could persist. You might get one for a brief period of time, but you would very rapidly get the general proletariat demanding, oh, can we have this, can we have that, can we have the other? And some politician would come up in a democracy and offer that, and take away the libertarian ideal very rapidly. because libertarianism is not. Freedom is not easy. It's almost a lot easier to be in a democratic sort of nanny state where nanny state will take huge amounts of money off the wealthy or the working and set you up with a nice little home, and all you need to do is sit there on your backside and watch Sky TV and deal a bit of pot out the back garden and to your neighbours, and you're good. And I've seen it. We've all seen that happen. There's plenty of people out there on the social do a bit of painting and decorating, and
on the social trick. I'm sorry, that makes you sound so old.
I know. I'm sorry, but I am. It is very, very easy for that to say.
Old,
why am I so old?
So
I
old.
Look. I am not old. I am just highly leveled up.
Fair enough.
I have the big experience. Many XP points.
But before we get into our final point here, there's another good quote from Mr. Mises himself. It is on page 254 of Omnipotent Government: The Rise of the Total State and Total War, which is actually written. I've just remembered in 1944. He wrote this while the war was still going on, which is an amazing act of foresight. This feels like something that was probably written in the 60s, unless ignore some of the time references where he talks about the Nazi state as if it's still around, because it is still around at this stage. He wrote this in 1944, which is amazing. He was able to do that.
We have mentioned Ludwig von Mises' ability for foresight before, though, because he was the one that was offered the job at the well-paid bank, and so much to the chagrin of his girlfriend, went, no, it's all about to go completely Pete Tong. I'm not having anything to do with that. Sod it. And his girlfriend got very, very PO'd about it, and he said no, and lo and behold, the Great Depression happened. So Mr. Mises was quite the visionary. He could see what was around the corner quite effectively. It's quite impressive.
It is effective. It's great. Again, this quote is wonderful here. He says, many popular fallacies concerning socialism are due to the mistaken belief that all friends of socialism advocate the same system. On the contrary, every socialist wants his own socialism, not the other fellows. He disputes the other socialists' right to call themselves socialists. In the eyes of Stalin, the Mensheviks and Trotskyites are not socialists but traitors, and vice versa.
Socialism hasn't been tried, guys.
Yeah. The Marxists call the Nazis supporters of capitalism, which was written into their version of history that we read. Mm-hmm. The Nazis call the Marxists supporters of Jewish capital. If a man says socialism or planning, he always has in view his own brand of socialism, his own plan. Thus, planning does not, in fact, mean preparedness to cooperate peacefully. It means conflict. He then goes on to basically talk about the ridiculousness of making a world government and worldwide planning, and the fact that you basically have to create a worldwide totalitarian state. But he's right in that the only thing socialists agree on is that there should be socialism. They don't agree on what that socialism is. No. And they don't agree on who gets redistributed where to what. They agree on that you should use state power and state terror to do so, and they agree on that you can, in fact, be omnipotent and plan an economy, but it's the minutiae where we get the conflict. And it is that conflict that the elites take advantage of, because if you instill in people the idea of socialism, it becomes their socialism. It doesn't become one socialism. And in the modern era, you exploit those divides. That's what the modern left has been extremely good at doing, is giving people vague promises, but playing them off enough to remain in power. It is it's not a bug, it's a feature, to put it that way.
Yeah.
But it does. It becomes the wrangling of my socialism is better than your socialism. Because inherently, everyone's idea of how an economy should be planned will be different.
Oh, yes, that's it. I mean, the Trotskyites, which are your neocons and your neolibs, also, aka globalists, are where we're at now. really, and as far as they're concerned, yeah, real socialism has never been tried because so far we've had, Maoism, we've had Stalinism, we've had Leninism, etc., etc. And as we know very well, certainly Stalin and Lenin did not like Trotsky at all. Now, there was various reasons for that. Some would even say that it was, to do with the size of his hat. There was that no, jokes aside, there was a significant amount of anti-Semitism in Russia in those days. Probably is today as well. And Trotsky was Jewish in nature and birth. In nature, ooh, damn.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. Yeah,
yeah, no, and as a result, that Stalin, I think, was quoted as saying there will never be a Jew in control of Russia. And they ousted him partially because of that, but since then he has gained an awful lot of traction in his since his death, and
yes.
you see his ideologies not often admitted to, but every time you hear someone, every time you see someone tearing up when they listen to Imagine. Yeah, I guarantee you, whether they know it or not, they will start espousing Trotskyite ideas. Every single time.
Towards the 3 hour mark now, Trig.
Yes, so we are.
We really have to, despite my slight excursion to the land of phone, thank you, Windows, very cool. We have to get to the final analysis we do on all of these streams, which is the power analysis. We look at pure power politics and we ask who benefits.
Who gains the power? Who loses power? Who gains the wealth and who loses wealth? And as always, the people that lose the power and the wealth, regardless of the system, are the people that vote in or fight for the people that end up in power. Is a good way of summing it up really bleeding quickly. But yeah, I mean, whether or not they're voted in hot lead and copper and brass, or voted via the ballot box, the people ending up with the shit end of the deal are the guys that are desperately trying to, go to work, earn a living, and come home and feed their kids. Stick the feet up and watch a bit of telly. Suddenly they find everything's going up in price and their wages are going down, or at least standing still.
Well, it's interesting because we're not looking at a time period here. Well,
no.
We kind of are, but we're essentially looking at the interwar years of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And comparing that then next week to the interwar years of Britain and the United States. But in terms of Nazi Germany and in terms of the Soviet Union, who gains power is almost absolute. The party gains absolute power in both these countries.
Yeah.
They are, able to exercise, their will and carry out all the atrocities that we know them for in history. Again, well-trodden ground. But there's a great quote here, just kind of summing up this. This is from The Great Fiction by Mr. Hopper has been very useful because he is wonderful at talking about all these people. Like he talks about Ralph Raico, who you quoted earlier, which again I'm hoping to bring up more. He talks about Lou Rockwell, again, a very good writer. We quoted him as well, and he talks about Murray Rothbard, who is, I think, he was the underpinning of the early part of the series, and we will reference him again and again and again, because he is so good on economics and so good on power dynamics and how economics relates to who is in power really. But yeah, Hopper doesn't say about Murray Rothbard. Above all, it was Murray who taught me to never trust official history, invariably written by the victors, but to conduct all historical research instead like a detective investigating a crime. Always, first and foremost, as a first approximation, follow the money in search of a motive, which is what we're doing here. Who is to gain, whether in terms of money, real estate, or sheer power, from measure all that. In most cases, answering this question will lead you directly to the very actor or group of actors responsible for the measure of policy under consideration. Simple as it is to ask the question, however, it is much more difficult and requires arduous research to answer it and to unearth it from under a huge smokescreen of seemingly high-minded rhetoric and pious agenda. The hard facts and indicators, the money flows and welfare gains to actually prove a crime and identify and out the perpetrators. That's, again, I hadn't read this before we did this, honestly. I hadn't read this before I did the research for this stream. Obviously, I read it before we did the stream, but it's amazing seeing these ideas mirrored here, because this exactly is the dialectic we've come up with kind of semi-independently.
Yeah.
He has been led here by the same work that we have read, but he is spot on when he says that you cannot listen to an official history, and you cannot listen to all of, the rhetoric at the time about the Soviet Union in Nazi Germany was written because they had won. They had taken control, and they were able to put out propaganda. And a lot of it has been written into history, especially on the Soviet side at face value.
There's one we actually I didn't notice, but we'd cut it from this, and it's another quote by Hopper that I'd like to. You must know it. It's the one where he's talking about the highwaymen. And
yes.
I would like to include this at the end before we do, because I think this really I love this, because it's very, very, it's not succinct because it is quite a wordy description, but it does, in my mind, sum up government for me very, very effectively. And
sure, we've got time. If you want to, we can do that before I'd like to read the final quote, which is from Liberty. There's two of them from Liberty or Equality, which I think are some of the greatest quotes I've ever heard about democracy. They are frankly amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, hold on. Go for it. You take that. I want to have a crack at this one. This Hopper one at the end, though, because it is a nice and succinct bit. You're going to go for the. It is obvious that all these vistas are unacceptable. Is that the one?
Yeah, I will go for that one. But if you want to, I think you should probably read the Hopper one first.
Okay, let's go for the Hopper one. Hold on. Where is it? Where did I put it? I had it. Here we go. The government, like a highwayman, says to a man, your money or your life, and many, if not most, taxes are paid under the compulsion of that threat. The government does not, indeed, waylay a man in a lonely place, spring upon him from the roadside, and holding a pistol to his head, proceed to rifle his pockets, but the robbery is none the less a robbery on that account. And it is far more dastardly and shameful. The highwayman takes solely upon himself the responsibility, danger, and crime of his own act, and does not pretend that he has any rightful claim to your money, or that he intends to use it to your own benefit. He does not pretend to be anything other than a robber. He has not acquired impudence enough to profess to be merely a protector, and that he takes man's money against their will, merely to enable him to protect those infatuated travellers who feel perfectly able to protect themselves, or does not appreciate his peculiar system of protection. He is too sensible a man to make such professions as these. Furthermore, having taken your money, he leaves you, as you wish him to do. He does not persist in following you along the road against your will, assuming to be your rightful sovereign on account of the protection that he affords you. He does not keep protecting you by commanding you to bow down and serve him, by requiring you to do this and forbidding you to do that, and by robbing you more and more money as often as he finds it of his own interest or pleasure to do so, and by brandishing you as a rebel, a traitor, and an enemy of your own country, and shooting you down without mercy if you dispute his authority or resist his demands. He is much too much of a gentleman to be guilty of such impostures and insults and villainies as these. In short, he does not, in addition to robbing you, attempt to make you either his dupe or his slave. The proceedings of these robbers or murderers who call themselves the government are directly the opposite to these single highwaymen. That's...
It's quite a famous one. Well, it is in certain circles anyway, but it is a great. The thing is, he there is actually talking about even the night watchman state.
Yes. I love it. I mean, it is very, very much a yes. It's a libertarian par excellence, almost ANCAP quote of note. But it does. I do find
Well,
it somewhat endearing.
it's a great way of dealing with coercion,
Yes.
and it's the only honest way to look at it. In that, you can trick yourself into thinking you are doing it voluntarily, but it is really just done under the threat of force, and you can't see it as not being done under the threat of force. And to see so is naive. Honestly, it's naive to the point of ridiculousness, and he's right. In that analogy, I don't think you could see it any other way. That someone who says that they are your protector, as he talks about in the previous quote, an expropriating property protector is a contradiction in terms. You can't protect someone's property whilst also stealing part of it. That's not how that works.
No, it isn't. Somewhat. Hold on a second. How are you protecting? You just nicked that. Oi, give it.
Well,
yeah.
It's very big monkey tell small monkey he take all his bananas, then give him slightly less bananas back, and that's fair. He's actually protecting his bananas and taking a small fee to do it. It is there's many people who regard the night watchman state as at its core a protection racket, which it can be seen as. But again, that's getting into a lot of underpinning libertarian theory, but it is very important, and I don't think there's very good refutation of his night watchman analogy there. His highwayman analogy, even when it comes to something like the night watchman state, because they are saying your security is contingent on your submission.
Yes.
A final quote I have here, though, is very much regarding the system of democracy, and basically where its authority is based. Again, we're reading from Liberty or Equality, The Challenge of Our Time, by Mr. Unpronounceable. It's, again, wonderful book, terrible name. He's talking in a broad sense about the idea of self-governance and the idea of, the basis of political power. In quotes, he's quoting saying, authority is nothing else than numbers and the sum of many things, as kind of the anathema of what he believes. But he goes on to say that it is obvious that all these vistas are unacceptable to anybody clinging to a non-materialistic philosophy. We have to reject them as figmentary and return to the conscious realities of the human person. It is, after all, man, with all his glories, his shortcomings, his desires, his longings, his emotions, his reason, his faith and his despair, who faces history and politics, not some imaginary polycephalic centipede. Polycephalic means many-headed, by the way. It's a great word. To the philosopher of the new mechanism, the difference between the effectiveness of one person's vote among 5 and among 500,000 is merely in degree. This statement is mathematically correct, but existentially, this is by no means the case. I'm not going to read the rest of the quote. He basically breaks down how tiny each vote is and how diluted it is. But the statement there about man and the fact that, we're actually refuting a lot of this stuff in material terms. But outside of material terms, the total state has nothing to say. It has nothing to say about man. Again, in all these complexities, his glories, his shortcomings, his desires and emotions, it does not deal with kind of the metaphysics of the individual. It does not deal with man as a non-material being. And that is ultimately the core failure of the total state. It may nourish a man's pocket for a short time, but it diminishes his spirit and his soul. That is what this is saying. And that you become a bacteria. The start of this is to, if a multitude is considered to be one organism with something like a responsible group soul, and we simply identify it as the greater part of a whole, then to talk about self-government is justified, but only from the point of view of you being a germ, basically. He's saying that if the society is quite literally a leviathan, it is quite literally a living creature, then you are merely an amoeba on its back. And that is a very grim view of humanity. It's quite wonderful. It's a quite wonderful way of looking at things, because once you remove yourself out of the material, you start to realize that without the new man march of history bullshit of Hegelianism, that Marxism and the modern managerial state has nothing to say about the human condition. Nothing. There's another quick quote here I want to get through that oh god damn it, I've completely messed up where I am in the PDF. It's on page 108, and it says that government is almost always unsatisfactory and disappointing. True self-government can only be the mastery man exercises over himself. Most human beings need for this purpose a personal sphere, elbow room, privacy which cannot be invaded by either state or society. Families, for instance, are minor kingdoms, ideal spheres for the development of personality, and free societies always have strongly developed hierarchical built family cells. So what he's getting into here is that for liberty to exist, there needs to be a sphere which the state cannot affect.
This kind of I don't know if you caught the stream that Evelyn and I were on with British Knight the other day. And
yes.
We wrapped it up at the end of what can be done, and essentially it was without Fed posting, and came down to be strong in yourself and be that person that does not rely on the government to fill the pothole on the road outside his house. Be self-reliant and be an example to those around you of self-mastery, of being a strong person, of good character who people can look up to and will emulate, and be your own king is what it's saying there.
Yeah.
Because somebody else governing over you is always going to be, as he says there, unsatisfactory and disappointing, to say the least.
Well, I've made parts of this speech a few times. I'm going to go into it in great detail when we get to the end of this series. But as it says here, the only true self-governance is the mastery a man exercises over himself. You are only your own master, and the only real control you have is over your immediate environment and the people you interact with. That, and embracing that, is the only way to free yourself. And not subsuming yourself in all these processes, the democracy is almost like the Eucharist of the state, that you are putting your paper in a box as an act of, of pure faith that this will create a better world. And that is not only illusionary, it is delusional. That you are participating in an act of mass delusion when you participate in mass democracy, because you are not exercising your will yourself, you are abdicating it, to other people through a largely opaque and faith-based process. And that if you paid more attention to your own life, if you paid more attention to your own actions, you pay more attention to your own environment, and, as cringe as it sounds, being the change you want to be in the world, to be a cat poster, and really exercising that, really actualizing as a living human being with choice, then you can make change, and then you can really see the reality that you live in, not, the almost like sporting event, team flag waving that is party politics. Again, there's a quote from Hunter S. Thompson I need to find at some point when he's talking about politicians basically being like a man in a crowd at a football game telling the quarterback to score. You really don't have any control over the political process, neither do a lot of the politicians. They are merely in the crowd watching the game. And the sooner you can realize that, the better for you, because it frees you from all these mind viruses. It frees you from having your world ruined by buying into events that you really don't have control over and never can have control over, because they are not in your immediate environment and they are not generally immediately affecting you. It's, again, you need to look at yourself in this way. The true self-governance can only be the mastery a man exercises over himself. If you take nothing away from these streams, take that.
Yeah. Hey. Don't get upset about what's going off in Somalia. You do not want to get involved and try and sort that out. Certainly don't throw money at it. You can't do anything about that. But go over there and try and get involved in yourself, and you'll get into serious trouble. Yeah, look after your house. Tidy your room, bucko. Literally, kind of hours. Again, yes. Exercise control over that which you can exercise control over. And you might find you can exercise control beyond your front door, but it usually doesn't go much further unless you want to start exercising control over other people's lives who might not appreciate you doing so.
No, and as we've talked about in great detail, democracy is inherently a process of that.
Yeah.
It is a process by which the majority attempts to control the lives of the minority. And it is a process that is set in motion and controlled by an elite class, who are the ones who set the debate, they set what isn't voted on, they control membership of the political parties, and they use democracy as an illusionary tool to get people to make binary decisions on things that they may not even grasp, and they by design may not be capable of grasping. It is a system in which you are told you have control and then given no control.
I love what David Plummer's just put in the in chat. I thought the point of this stream so that my family can listen in and get concerned about me, and maybe even phone the police. Yes, that too. Yes, of course.
I will say that this stream has already been ads limited because we have the word totalitarian special in it, and we do mention Stalin and Hitler quite a lot. That was bound to happen. But yeah, I think if people again really engage with the material that is in these streams, they believe they might begin to see how radical some of it is, as compared to some of the more outwardly shocking things. It may seem rather banal in many aspects, but what is being said here is, goes a lot further than most people are willing to go. And when taken to its logical extreme, when thought through to its logical implications, may cause you to make decisions you thought you wouldn't want to make beforehand. Not to get too euphemistic with that, but again, it is an ideological and historical, framework for being anti-ideology in many ways, and it is a framework for what could be described as an overcorrection. Let's say it is the intellectual underpinnings of what is being said in many circles already, and that you have to believe that you as a human being are capable of being right and not to defer your own authority. Again, that one of the big takeaways here, that if you think something is unjust, you must be willing to speak out about it. You must be willing to exercise your own power, not wait for someone else to do it in solving injustice. Again, I think that's about as specific I can make it without actually getting arrested. So. Anyway,
I'm going to take away what Plasma Rob has just said as in chat as I'm going to say thank you for that. Yes. As a post-mortem, my ad hoc German accent was was apparently went down well. I'm glad about that. Yes. Yes. Big government is bad. Okay.
It is bad. Yes.
I've yet to find one that's good. But definitely all the ones we've seen so far are pretty much bad. Although I will occasionally go, Roman government was good, right? It was, but I have a thing for togas and politics via knife and poison, for some reason.
Well, thank you to our members.
Yes.
S. Smith, British Knight, James Merry, Portrait Seal, HK 9410, The Real Yaddle, Be Happy, Socratic, Canadianistan, Velculus, Subarain, Wind Talker, and Wes Wyman. Thank you very much to you guys. Again, thank you to everyone who's borne with us whilst we're being horrendously filtered by YouTube. I have constant messages on Discord apologizing for missing these streams because people are having them hidden from them. So again, do try and seek us out. We are quite hard to find these days, but that's partially by design, because if I think we were a larger YouTube channel saying the things we were saying, we'd either be completely chucked off the internet or possibly imprisoned, because these are not things you are allowed to say.
Sadly not.
Especially when people actually understand. Like, I think if somebody who was like an actual establishment figure leftist came and watched these streams and understood them fully, they would be on the phone pretty quickly.
They're denouncing democracy. Good God, get the police around. Yes,
and they're doing it in very, very vociferous terms. But yes, again, thank you for all your support, guys. It's like I said, it's been a bit of a struggle with some of the setbacks we've had, technically and time wise, and with just the way that YouTube treats smaller channels. But we are going to get to the end of this. We are going to see this through. We are going to keep going because I think we found a rich vein to mine here.
Yeah.
So yes. Thank you all for sticking with us. And Trig, do you have anything to shill before I get into the shillings?
All I can shill really is me playing Deus Ex of late. You know what? I've gained like 20 odd subscribers to my tiny wee little channel of what was like 45 and is now. I have a meme 69 subscribers to Triggerhippy on YouTube now. But we've been playing Deus Ex, and last night was a total bun fight because everyone from the Discord server jumped in and desperately tried to get me to say the gamer word and various other things on stream, and it was loads of fun actually. I think I'm going to openly allow people to jump in on my streams in the future.
Well, we do actually have a new Twitter set up.
We do, yes. Yes.
We have a joint Twitter account. I think I'm mostly posting at the moment since you're actually on Twitter and I'm mostly not. But yeah, we do have a Starman and the Boomer Twitter account specifically for this channel. So if you want to follow me on social, I know I've been off Twitter for a long time. That's deliberate, and I'll be trying to keep this Twitter a little bit more low key than my usual like 10,000 follower kind of spurg out fests, which they really were. Just going around like whacking people with a stick until they kick me off again. That's not what I'll be doing on this one. Again, mostly dedicated to this channel and specifically this stream for the time being. But yeah, if you want to contact me there, that's good. Apart from that, I'm still on Minds. I still got a lot of good interaction on Minds. You guys have been very good at following me over there, so I will shill minds.com again. Much better than Twitter, and actually the place I prefer to post. I do post there every day still. There's all the links down below. I'm still doing bits and pieces of writing on Substack, on anti-politics, which our researcher Evelyn set up. Yesterday I released an article about Harry Hay.
I enjoyed that.
Yes,
very good. Very good. Infuriating, to say the least, but yes.
Again, Sorry. I'll shove that in chat as well if you guys want. But yeah, anti-politics is where my writing is. And yeah, it's about Harry Hay, who is credited as the founder of the gay rights movement, but he was also a massive nonce. So take from that what you will. Apart from that, I don't really have much else. And again, we're getting towards the 3.5 hour mark here. Good lord. So we do need to wrap this one up.
We always end up 3.5 hours. It's always 3.5 hours, just about. If you look at most of them, they've all been 3.5 hours. We can't be surprised at it now.
I think we've done quite well with these, again, with how big the topics are. And
yeah, I know. Without a doubt.
These tend to gain a lot of views over time. I'm quite glad that people really are just watching this through. And a lot of people have been with us and watched every single episode live since the beginning, which is insane because of how much content there is. But yeah, we do have this here as a reference kind of guide. So do come back, listen to it, in bits and pieces if you need to. And I will be chopping these up eventually to have more topic-specific stuff if you want to pick stuff out. But yeah, for the time being, thank you guys for watching, and we will be back next week with finally 1929 to 1939. We'll actually be doing the time period again, so that's going to be interesting. Lots of fit in there, but yeah, I hope to see you again next week, and goodbye.
Take it easy, guys.